Better leave it or don't. We've been lied to by the elite ruling class for over 5,000 years, and it's been contained by secret societies, particularly Freemasonry. I could go on with numerous paintings of powerful historical figures, all making the secret M sign, meaning Mason. That's research all its own. Controlling history isn't just about being superior or sweeping mistakes under a rug, though. It's about controlling the masses and our worldview, so we can't see what the hidden hand is doing. These rich and powerful elitists aren't just control freaks. They literally see the rest of us as slaves, goyim, or human cattle, lab rats, and even insects to be used and dispensed with in any way they see fit. And that's not just a conspiracy either. It's just life from their point of view. It's been that way all along. The burning of the Library of Alexandria did cover at least a few tracks that would lead us to some truths, particularly about giants, creatures like dragons that are ubiquitous in every culture on Earth, and even religious scripture. But there are numerous other instances where our true history was stifled and kept from the public. Remember, the elite have always ruled the lower classes as peasants, serfs, plebeians, and slaves. It wasn't until recent history that the quote-unquote rest of us had any say in anything at all, let alone speak our minds freely. So we'll try and uncover the more important aspects here as we put some pieces back together. One of the things we'll be discussing is the longest con of a jailbreak in history, from the abyss or bottomless pit to be more specific. You'll see the 666 spiral imagery used a lot because it's a symbol for a dimensional portal, gate, or wormhole depending on your philosophy. I'm drawing parallels to show that it's not just the number of a man or beast, which it actually is and we'll get to, but also a code. Symbols often have multiple meanings. It has to do with hexagrams and demon summoning, and why you'll see a hexagram shown on the back of a US dollar bill, just for one. It's like the triangulation of a sort of demon signal, to simplify it, and a more powerful symbol than the pentagram. The Star of David was originally not an evil sign, but as with all things in the synagogue of Satan and Luciferian Freemasons, it's been twisted for evil purposes. It may mean the Seal of Solomon, important to Masons, but can also mean the Talisman of Saturn, also known as Satan. It can also mean as above, so below, a well-known adage of Satanism and Freemasonry, often shown with Baphomet and used in Kabbalistic practices. Don't mistake that to mean heaven and earth. It refers to earth being above and hell being below. I think that should be obvious. The hexagrammatical 6 points can represent the 6 points of space with only a point of origin needed, like the 7th symbol needed in the movie Stargate. That's a clue they were giving us, actually. Interestingly, demon or alien activity seems to have become more prevalent since the Babylon working, which I'll discuss later, and uses a 7-point heptagram symbol. People more often associate the pentagram as the demon summoning symbol, but they all have their own uses in Satanism. I'm asserting this has to do with bringing so-called spirit guides into the world, which we'll talk more about later, along with their celebrity host bodies, or what most people refer to as demons. There's more to it than just one symbol, though. Lucifer is associated with the lightning bolt in Bible scripture, and it's included in Nazi occultism as well as Satanism. There's a reason we're still using electricity instead of natural sources like the ley lines of the earth or magnetic forces used by people like Edward Leeds Scanlon to build the Coral Castle in Florida. And it has little to do with free energy collapsing the world economy and elite power structures. These sources do exist, but are ridiculed outside of witch covens and secret societies because electricity actually aids them in bringing demonic spiritual forces into our unwitting lives, much as the pulsing signals of fluorescent bulbs and power grids can aid the powers that be in mind controlling the public. Don't run off just yet, but if you listen to this coast-to-coast interview, it's well explained by someone's own personal experience and helps to understand the gang stalking phenomenon as well as the negative forces at work. I set the time marker where he talks about it. It's worth checking out later. I can also show that Enoch, biblical scripture, and folklore all talk about binding a devil figure in the earth. Many devils, actually. Demons are very real to Satanists, and they are trying to break them out of their prison, though they may view that prison as another dimension, universe, or star system. You'll notice there's also a similarity between the white light people claim to see when they're dying, the rainbow bridge the Vikings spoke of, and the river Styx with the boatman of death. All these relate to wormholes or gates to another realm. In this case, though, the Satanists I'll be referring to mainly are purposely trying to open the floodgates of hell with things like CERN, actually, possibly even nuclear weapons, and let all the unwary Christians and others have their own demon spirit to be potentially possessed by. Probably several. Demonic possession is very much on the rise. I'll add more to this point later as we try to answer who these demons are that are trying to escape. Alistair Unholy Crowley, a Satanist, Freemason, and head of the OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis, drew a picture of a demon called Lam with Eastern origins like Lama, but I'm saying his demon called himself Lamb because he was on the lamb, as it were. He was running from God, in a sense. It wasn't for being cute and fuzzy or impersonating Jesus. As with all things satanic, it has a twisted, deeper meaning than the obvious. Was it what we refer to as a fallen angel, or a demon of a different kind, though it very much appears as what we'd call a gray alien? Before we address that, let's note 3 important issues. 1, it's the modus operandi of Satanists like Crowley to try to control the minds of the public, particularly through the militaries, and they now do this largely with electronics and hypnosis, what's known as psychotronics, and MK Ultra, among other projects, but I'll deal more with that later. The important point is keeping the rest of the public from believing in angels, demons, and even Nephilim offspring, giants, along with the idea of magic. It may be that Lam is a form of psyop, psychological operation, rather than a form of fallen angel or alien visitor, to keep everyone in the dark about Lucifer. 2, Satanists worship an actual fallen angel, as mentioned in the Bible, books of Enoch, and in other religions, who will mostly just refer to throughout this as Satan, though that's only a nickname. People's names used to reflect deeds, occupations, and dispositions, and Satan merely means adversary or opponent, which is how Satanism functions, basically, opposition to conventional society and Christianity in particular. I may speak of Lucifer or Azazel, but it all comes down to the leader of the fallen ones, as mentioned in the holy texts. Lucifer is mentioned by famous Freemasons like Albert Pike, and demonology in general is spoken of by Masons like Manly P. Hall. There are so many others that will just suffice to say it's taken seriously by Satanists, Freemasons, and others because it is real. Crowley's teachings happen to be the most adhered to, often related to theosophy in many opinions, and he also had a hand in establishing New Age philosophy. He created the idea for the Babylon working, I'll talk more about later, and it has everything to do with the little green men or gray aliens everyone is familiar with these days. Little leprechauns like Lamb, in my own opinion. 3, the OTO has an indirect, or possibly direct, correlation with the Masonic lodges of the Grand Orient, as its name itself implies, and both organizations, at least with the Bavarian Illuminati's lodges of the Grand Orient, originated in the same part of the world. The OTO also has an association with the Rite of Memphis and Mizraim, in that Mizraim might have been a part of the lineage of Cain and the Nephilim giants. Before we look at what angels might be, I want to add just one more important point. Did you notice everyone in the hidden hand image was white? Obviously, everyone knows white people have always tried to control the world, but it's more than just epidermal pigmentation providing ego. It's because a certain segment of white people consider themselves of the line of Cain, children of the fallen angels, many who call themselves the B'nai Ha-Nephilim, basically meaning sons of Lucifer or Satan. Nephilim of the ancient holy texts, like the Bible, were giants, literal giants, who were also considered demigods like Nimrod, who was also Gilgamesh and many other heroes in lore. So these white people, though not giants, consider themselves of this same lineage. Not all Satan worshippers or Luciferians of the Illuminati are random, greedy psychotics hoping to get ahead by selling their souls to the devil. They believe they were born of evil, and maybe they were. Though the New World Order has many colors of people, it is an elite group of whites and phony Jews who Jesus spoke of, who look down on people of color and seek to control us all, even other whites they consider inferior. And if you're not with them and Satan, then you're inferior in any case. They consider angels to be white, who produced white amongst originally dark-skinned humanity. All angels were sons of God, fallen or not, so they also considered Jesus the same in this regard. That's why he's always white in so many religious pamphlets from Freemason-controlled churches in particular. I don't want to labor or argue this point, though, because no one's elite here. We're all sinners before God, as they say. So when we refer to the Illuminati in these truth-seeking videos, there's more behind the evil eye than just one organization or even color. The Temple of Set in the U.S. military, Church of Satan, the Synagogue of Satan, I've personally equated with the Freemasons, an extension of the ancient Brotherhood of the Snake, are all together in this New World disorder plot of domination. Politicians, entertainers, etc. all hail Lucifer and the Illuminati with one-eye sun symbolism. All describe how sun worship evolved through Nimrod and Babylon later. While the hidden eye hand symbol is well known, as is the 666 OK symbol, they are taken to mean the Eye of Horus, Ra, Set, Saturn, Satan, or just the Illuminati, the all-seeing eye. The 666 OK hand symbol actually means the spiral portal to the abyss that I mentioned regarding hexagrams. There are so many instances of these hand symbols that I'll just quickly flash several as we begin looking at what angels are and how they are a part of this NWO takeover. At this point in history, most have been led to believe the word extraterrestrial is a better replacement for the word angel. It's hard to argue, since extraterrestrial implies beings from beyond the Earth, though it's assumed they would be from another planet. I have other material to cover this, but there are holy scriptures implying that the Creator, or God, created the stars themselves, which would more likely allude to the creation of this universe. If we understand how to create stars ourselves, as you can see here, then it's just as possible a more advanced being or race might create entire universes. Even the idea of a multiverse has already been established by science. Look that up later if you care. Angels are said to exist as beings of light in their purest state, not physical beings exactly, as even the name Lucifer implies, another name for the leader of the fallen angels, or the devil and Satan. That's why it said God is too bright to look at, and similar ideas you've probably heard before. And while this might be hard to accept, there's a reason for Satanism and occult science underlying secret societies, top levels of government, and even mainstream religions. The Bible even claims this is Satan's world for a time, and the very reason for all the demonology. This is probably the most important truth being withheld by the elite who pander to Lucifer, as I said, of Freemasonry specifically. One of the most interesting passages from the Torah or Bible provides more perspective of angels and God said in Genesis 1:26, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness." Even though I'll refer to God throughout this, as most people do, a singular being assumed to be Yahweh or Yeshua when speaking of the Bible, there are many angels, and 2/3 of those are not fallen ones, equaling 400 or so. I don't want to argue that there is a Lord of Spirits or that most consider angels to be his divine creation as much as mankind is. That's not as much the point here. Read all the scriptures and make your own distinctions if that's what you're after. I personally include the books of Enoch, as it really ought to be biblical canon. There are reasons it wasn't, not all of them evil intentions, but Enoch is quoted by many biblical authors and figures, including Jesus, and helps explain the nature of the relationship between angels and man. Enoch dealt with him directly and even knew of the Son of Man long before his arrival, so he deserves consideration. El, plural Elohim, is an ancient Hebrew word for God, and why the word angel ends with El, and why angel names also end that way. They did have a part in driving polytheism in early history, mainly amongst fallen angels and early pagans, and later we were corrected to a monotheistic path by Yahweh. The angels are named in the first book of Enoch, well before the Bible was written, both those loyal to God and the fallen ones. When Enoch spoke with Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael, and others, he mentioned them being able to appear as men when they wished, probably so as not to frighten him. If true, that ability, the taking of forms, would have to apply to all angels, you'd figure, even fallen ones, though eventually the fallen ones were imprisoned beneath the earth. This may be the root of the demonic depictions of Satan, taking forms. But in our time, fallen angels have been equated with little gray men, little green men, like Crawley's lamb, and admittedly the timing of the end of the 70 generations spoken of in the Bible, abductions, alien hybrids, Nephilim, and advancement of technology does seem too coincidental to be ignored. Is it just a form they've taken to deceive us? You'd think there would be more mention of their appearance in Enoch in the Bible. They definitely don't look like the angels in paintings or stained glass in churches. Perhaps there's more to the story, given many claimed sightings of other so-called alien beings like reptilians. In any case, these little green men are not our friends, and by all but a few accounts have done nothing but torment humanity and deceive us. It's more than difficult to picture them as a form of angel, even a fallen one. An angel of the Lord appeared many times in the Bible, even to prophets, in fact making it the responsibility of prophets to tell the world it was worse than disgraceful, generally before destroying entire landscapes. And while I and others speak of this being the end times, the entire earth is in question now, not just a city or two. They'd mainly dealt with mankind in the hope of righting a wrong that happened ages before the Bible was even written. When the fallen angels mated with the daughters of men, as it's said, their offspring are the Nephilim giants mentioned in the Bible and folklore, not the manimals like Molech, Baphomet, Pan, and others, who are assumed to be demons by many. There were 200 fallen angels, called a team in the book of Enoch, and possibly why an even number, who had committed this atrocity before the flood, the great deluge, and I'm also asserting, like many others, that this is the reason for the flood to begin with, to wipe out the unholy offspring. As I said, the so-called devil was bound and imprisoned in the earth using references like the book of Enoch, Jude 1:6 of the Bible, paraphrasing Enoch, or even Prometheus if you're familiar. It's a story often plagiarized and used in media to distort the real truth with. The fallen ones all gave knowledge or illumination, Illuminati, which is specified in Enoch, and God put them in Hades or hell for it. Hell is literally under your feet, just as depicted in all media since man was able to draw and write. It's their sentence to be trapped here with us, since they chose to fall from heaven, and Satanists who sympathize with the dark angels or just seek fame and fortune have been aiding them to escape their prison ever since. This is how Aleister Crowley ended up contacting an alien entity named Lam, who we'll come back to again and again. So what of these depictions of half-animals the Egyptians, Greeks, and others drew and painted? Could they be what the fallen angels appeared as before their imprisonment, or even genetically manufactured? Enoch claimed they could appear as men, remember, so why not manimals? Could they be linked with what's been labeled Atlantis, claimed to be the origin of Freemasonry as much as the building of the Giza pyramids or even the Tower of Babel? And why Satanists worship goat, dog, and bull-headed demons? They took forms to scare people, who knows? The Bible and other holy scriptures don't really make mention of Atlantis or the pyramids, particularly minotaurs, centaurs, mermaids, or other creatures, so no doubt this is part of the hidden history secret societies have kept from us. There's almost no combination of man and animal that hasn't been depicted, so it's more likely they're either forms taken by fallen angels to deceive early mankind or even rule us as, or very secluded incidents of genetic splicing. My reasoning for that is there are no bones or remains found to show for it, at least that we know of. There are horned skulls claimed to be unearthed, but it's still unproven. The image of Baphomet, so prevalent in Freemasonry, Kabbalism, and Satanism in general, is almost assuredly a form taken by a fallen angel, as Nephilim are clearly defined as giant humans in ancient scriptures. There's also a direct link with the idea of lycanthropy and witchcraft, including other animals besides wolves, bats, crows, etc., and most religions outside of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all have a wide range of transforming deities. People worshipped these beings for a reason. I know many once claimed there are fish people from Sirius, draconian lizard folk from Orion, or even Nordic white people from the Pleiades, but this is more deception that would have been explained to Enoch or other prophets by the named angels of the Lord. Enoch and others were not delusional and were not lied to. The angels would have pointed and told the prophets where they came from, and you can't point to somewhere outside the known universe. That's why it's not in the Bible or other holy texts. It would seem more rational for aliens to be from other planets, but in this case, they're just not. This hidden history is actually a large part of the reason many won't accept the Bible as gospel. The reason for hiding it, in my own opinion, is to cover the damage done by the fallen ones, and the angels of God would not like to see a lamentable history repeat itself where we already deal with Satanists and secret societies as it is. We're dealing with it anyway. I'm saying whatever Atlantis there might have been got doused, then God and the 400 angels bound with the 200 criminal spirits in the earth, along with the spirits of the Nephilim offspring, very literally. It's a concept well beyond other planets and solar systems. How the incarceration of spirits might be possible is just a matter of technology we don't understand, and why there's a need for numerology and occult science within Satanism to begin with.
What was the tone of it, though? Was it jokey, or was it quite...
No, it wasn't jokey at all. It was sick. That's about the only way to describe it. It was sick.
What you're hearing is the first recording ever made of the Skull and Bones initiation ceremony.
This so-called magic is a misunderstood and dangerous technology, and how these evil spirits are being let out into the world in increasing numbers in our time. And a spirit is just an aspect of reality we don't quite understand either, relative to ideas of other dimensions and multiverses within sciences like quantum physics. It's a part of us explained within the Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit also. If you prefer to believe in the Sumerian version or physical material extraterrestrials, alien visitors, it's part of the Great Deception actually. Also bear in mind that the Anunnaki story is from Sumeria, which is Nimrod's Babylon if you're following the Bible as historical reference, so this is a major point of contention to many. If you want to convolute it even further, Hinduism has some interesting stories about Vimanas that could be relevant, but I'll talk about Babylon and Nimrod later, and why things are so convoluted across religions. The Bible, Torah actually, didn't really come along until Moses' time, and it is devoid of some specifics, but he wasn't the one deceived. Sumerians were, and by fallen angels. Again, the flood happened partly to wipe out abomination of DNA, God's creation. Yahweh started over with Noah, hoping for purer genetics, and it was better to leave the past buried so we could move on without polytheistic influences as well as demonic, though that's obviously still a problem in our time that wasn't easily rectified. Now let's move on to what got the fallen angels in trouble with the Elohim to begin with, their giant Nephilim offspring.
Hi, I'm John. It's day 10. 12:03 a.m. Still nothing happening. Yeah, what is that? It's like breathing. Come to the pantry. No. Oh, here. Oh my God. Oh my God. Go, 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 go. Go up, go, go. Go up. What the hell is that? Do you feel anything? I feel it. It's cold. What the hell is that? Oh my God. Oh my God, dude. What the hell is that? Oh shit. Oh my God. Oh my God. Go, go, go. Well, go in. Go, go. Dude. Look out, look out, look out. Oh my God. What the? I don't know. That's crazy. Dude. I told you. Let's get out of here. Let's get it. Go, go.
There were giants in those days, as it states in the Torah and Bible, called Nephilim or Gibborim. They were loved like children by the fallen angels, according to Enoch, and the fallen ones wept over their loss when Yahweh destroyed them with the flood. These are the titans the Greeks wrote about, and the giants continued on after the deluge through what was assumed to be the genes from the wife Noah's son Ham took, the line of Nimrod and Canaanites. Genetic switches like a growth inhibitor gene, or even the fact that dinosaurs, dire creatures, saber-tooths, and other larger things existed in prehistory may help explain how Titan-sized giants were even possible to begin with. This was the impure blood that God sent the Israelites after, Nephilim blood, and why it was abomination. It wasn't just about infanticidal worshippers of fallen angels and false gods. There are numerous articles of archaeological digs in the 1800s noting giants of various sizes and also mentioning 6 fingers and toes a few times. The same kind of giant was spoken of in the Philistine Wars in the Bible. There's also an interesting note about giant grapes in Numbers 13:23 if you're interested. The sons of Anak, Goliath and his brothers, were who Yahweh sent the Israelites after mainly, and that was the main reason I'm asserting that God called the Israelites into war camps, the leftover giant DNA from Ham's wife. Giants are actually an integral part of worldwide lore, from Native Americans fighting tribes of them to the Viking ice giants, fire giants, and others that they or their fallen angel gods like Odin or Thor fought. In the Book of Giants, fragmented as it may be, the giants are described as malevolent, hateful beings. Giants caused a lot of war amongst mankind, as well as their own, because of their baleful and egotistical dispositions described in the Book of Jubilees and elsewhere. And why wouldn't they be, especially toward smaller humans? They probably ate babies for snacks, so it's a good thing Yahweh had them all destroyed. The Book of Giants also mentions creatures and monsters, so there may be some truth to the man-animal hybrids being genetic abominations also, but there's nothing solid in Scripture to fall back on there, just folklore of various cultures. Many feel it was actually the giants who built all the ancient temples, or were at least the workers. That would help explain how such huge stones could be moved around. No doubt these were temples built to honor the fallen angels, all the Baals, Baphomets, and Molechs of Atlantis. And the flood may be why some temples like Pumapunku are demolished. Just my own theory. Maybe the giants got angry and knocked them all down. It's also been suggested that the Great Wall of China was built for keeping out giants, and why it was necessary to build it so long and so high. On a side note, while we're on the subject of Atlantis, while I made mention of crystal pyramids in my last iteration, the lack of real proof, whether they're found in the Bermuda Triangle or elsewhere, there's a very good chance of there being underwater architecture hidden by the militaries, whether made of crystal or not. It has been claimed that the Freemasons have their roots in Atlantis, as I said, and the Knights Templar, their known origin, obviously weren't temple builders by trade. Many speak of pyramids being batteries and other amazing lost technology, often relating to ley lines, geomagnetism, and more freely abundant sources of energy, which no doubt would have been wiped out with the flood also if true, and would provide an alternate explanation for moving giant stones used for some of those ancient temples. It was even said that Merlin the magician used a form of quote-unquote magic to move the stones for Stonehenge across England, a magic likely used by Edward Leedskalnin to build the Coral Castle. But if you look at something like the Colossus at Rhodes, you have to wonder how they constructed something so large without the help of giants. That's a bit more than a few giant stones laying on top of one another, and across a harbor inlet at that. Also, it looks like a giant. The Giza pyramids are still a mystery with no definitive answer for their construction, and many feel they were built long before the Egyptian dynasties. Maybe this is a part of why Egyptian pharaohs considered themselves children of the gods, as did other emperors and monarchs in the world. Food for thought. So, given the very extreme likelihood that giants actually built all the ancient temples, most of which are sunken by the flood or destroyed by some means, we could go on postulating. There may have been more reason for building them than just honoring fallen angels as gods, particularly sun gods, like I'll talk about next with Nimrod. What I'm saying is, if you look at a depiction of a Vimana and the Tower of Babel together, you'll notice that they appear quite a lot alike. I'm also saying this is the reason for all the pyramids, like the giants I'm claiming built, whether at Giza, South America, or wherever. It's also why the pyramid takes off as a spaceship in the movie Stargate, because they were all trying to build mock Vimanas, or perhaps these fallen angels, again refer to that LA UFO summoning event, would have provided some means for them to actually lift off. That's unlikely, but who knows. How I would even assume such a thing is because it's been suggested that the pyramid tombs are actually acoustic chambers, harmonically tuned to certain frequencies. If Edward Leedskalnin used a sonic and/or magnetic device to build the Coral Castle, it's very likely the ancients believed sound could not only move stones, but lift the entire structure off the ground. To further the point, it's why sound was used as a weapon in Frank Herbert's Dune, one of the most popular sci-fi epics ever. Now we're seeing psychotronics being used as weapons on subsonic and ultrasonic frequencies. No coincidence there. I believe it's one of the secrets of Freemasonry, both before and after the deluge, in any case. Giants built them, and to look like the Vimanas that are practically the entire basis for the Hindu religion, and why they incorporated so much of it into Kabbalism like chakras. The whole world was together at the Tower of Babel anyway. The Freemasons also want to usurp God's throne because according to some like Douglas Dietrich, who blew the whistle on Colonel Aquino and the Presidio child rape, the Masons feel God isn't even sitting on it. To them, it's an empty chair. But anyway, that's the reason for the Tower of Babel looking like it does, why Nimrod sought to kick God off his throne and thought he could, and as any Christian knows, it's the Lord Jesus Christ it was given to by the Father. It's not empty. And here's another revelation. Giants were real, okay? So they had to be doing something with their time besides eating babies. But where do the little green men like Crowley's Lamb fit into all this? Are they the leprechauns, gnomes, goblins, and elves so prevalent even in modern culture, especially with fantasy fiction more popular than ever? Are they really the gray aliens in disguise and misinterpreted throughout history? Obviously, I see a pattern of deception there, but before I move on from the giants, I wanted to note that giants were born of fallen angels, and if you believe in the spiritual side of angels and demons, then you would have to wonder if giants also had a spirit to carry on beyond their bodies after they were killed by the deluge. And as a spirit isn't something material, we might surmise or opine that their spirits weren't actually giant as their material bodies were. Why I bring this up is because of demonic possession. Their hateful spirits would have been dealt with like any other by the Lord of Spirits, as the Creator is named in Enoch, or Yahweh if you like, and not all possession is necessarily by the spirits of fallen angels, or little alien lambs for that matter. As I mentioned before, demonic possession is on the rise, and there are a lot of reports. More than 200 fallen angels could likely possess at once. So could Nephilim spirits also be possessing people, as these Satanists keep bringing spirits up out of the abyss, along with formerly evil men and women? Again, food for thought. While many people consider possession more in alignment with positive or negative energies, most stories of possession include a named entity, even if just generically called a demon. There may be instances of fallen angel possession, being possessed by the devil, as they say, but I would assume we're too repugnant in intelligence and species for them to want to do that for the most part. Thus, these are generally spirits of hateful giants and evil humans instead, just my own opinions and wild meanderings. It's why people claim to be possessed are often so maniacal, crazed, and wild. The abyss is not a fun place and most likely inspires a form of insanity. If you're familiar with the story of Jesus casting demons into a herd of swine, it seems they'll do anything to avoid going back there, even live as a pig, much as they realized it wasn't all it was porked up to be and immediately dove off a cliff. Not to digress. What I'm getting at is, in a way, the Nephilim are back, just as it states in Enoch and elsewhere that the fallen angels and Nephilim would again be a problem in the end times. In other words, they're back, and the Satanists are helping them out in demonic rituals, particularly the Illuminati witches. And since we brought up elves and little green lambs, I'll bring them up again as we refer to pagan holidays and their involvement, because it also involves giants, or a giant, specifically Nimrod, who we'll be talking about next. Nimrod was a mighty hunter, but for what reason? We can learn a bit from the book of Joshua that he took over the world and created the first empire, and it's assumed a lot the same with the Bible version. In the book of Joshua, he's killed by Esau, brother of Jacob, who would be Israel, and his reign ends. There is no making him the sun god or any of what people are claiming about his links to Baal or Baal and sun worship. Joshua was probably not informed of Babylonian mystery schools for one, which clearly existed, and it's also not biblical canon for another. Evidence does support the theory of the one world, one language, original Illuminati empire on Earth, though. Nimrod took over the world for a time, and why he's mentioned where few others are. Moses had a name and not a lot more to write about him in the Torah. Nimrod was also a giant. His lineage is the same of the line of Cain and Canaanites through Ham's wife after the deluge, so it just kind of stands to reason with his mighty hunter image. The Bible may not say so, but again, it was so normal in those times that giants are barely given a nod for their size in the Bible at all. It's barely mentioned in a few places. Nimrod is also assumed to represent many other gods and heroes, like Gilgamesh in particular, Apollo, Odin, who is the main link back to Nimrod for Santa Claus, actually, and too many others to list. Why that works, especially in cases like Odin, is if you read the Bible, God sent the world off babbling to the four corners, as it were, after Nimrod tried to build the Tower of Babel to reach the sky and kick God off his heavenly throne. Odin is almost an anagram of Nimrod, Mr. Odin. And how close does Amun-Ra sound? Nimrah. Coincidence? That would be babbled for certain if true, and I believe it is. Other names reflect this babbling also. This is also how cultures, even in the Far East, have such similar tales of a great flood, gods, heroes, and even dragons. I'm also positing a couple of points here. Nimrod may well be the real source of Freemasonry with the Tower of Babel, at least after the so-called Atlantis and the pyramids and Noah. Where he got such knowledge may be through occult knowledge, magician advisors, fallen angel parentage, and or general Satan worship. Nimrod's Babylon is where Satanism and the worship of pagan gods starts all over again after the flood. He was already close to fallen angels, just for having been a giant in the line of Cain, and no doubt would have been an easy familial link to work through for Lucifer, Semjaza, if you read Enoch. My other point is that he's not necessarily where sun god worship comes from, or that he was the sun god himself. I've come to realize that it's not Semiramis who's responsible for that. I'll explain why in a minute. The whole backstory of Semiramis is another deception. Those who claim to have seen an angel, particularly Lucifer, the light bringer, claim they are beings of light too bright to look at. Would that not be like looking at the sun then? How easily fooled people might be by that. So we're really talking about Lucifer or Satan, who is the representation of the sun god, not Nimrod. It is possible Nimrod was possessed of the devil, though. Nimrod was a son of fallen angels, a Nephilim giant, and while possible for it to be blamed on him, I'm actually thinking it's not his doing, or Semiramis for that matter. She's a mystery character I need to address also, but one final thought. The Eye of the Freemasonic Pyramid is the Eye of the Watchers, and probably existed in fallen angel worship well before the flood. They somehow revived its usage and symbolism through Nimrod and Babylonian magic. I'm guessing they wanted someone to perform occult science witchcraft to be let out of their earthbound prison. Any science advanced enough would seem like magic, to paraphrase Arthur C. Clarke. And as far as the eye symbol, meaning the pineal gland, pine cone shaped, that's only part of the picture. It does represent the Watchers as they were called in the book of Enoch. Remember, Yahweh and the angels had bound the fallen angels in the earth by this point, in the abyss, at least according to Enoch and his paraphrasers, and they were not freely walking around as it speaks of in the story of Job. Maybe Lucifer tried to contact Nimrod in his sleep to get Nimrod to let him out. Psst! Hey, Nimrod, it's your daddy. Wake up. Wake up, ya Nimrod. Comedy aside, this does reflect the idea of Satan being let out into the world for a time, as it states in the Bible. I do have to point out a possible discrepancy here also. In the book of Enoch, the fallen angels were bound for 70 generations, and the Bible does have a 70-gen timeline also. Jude paraphrases Enoch about the binding in the earth, yet Satan, Lucifer, claims to be walking up and down on the earth in Job. See a problem here? I am a Bible believer, but there is a small margin of a conflict going on here. Maybe I'm missing something. The 70 generations ended in the 1900s, opinions on the exact year vary, when all our alien troubles really began and final judgment would take place after a time of working evil on the world. So how would Satan be walking the earth in Job's time? I'm sure there's just more to the story, so let's look at the role of Semiramis, not that I'll be answering this question. Semiramis is claimed to be the wife of Nimrod. While Joshua doesn't mention her, other sources do. Some texts say she was an inn and brothel keeper, making her the eventual whore of Babylon, a cover story in my opinion. Other stories say she was leading an entire nation along with her mythical husband, King Ninus, another babbled Nimrod, but all kingdoms eventually fell under Nimrod's rule. In any case, they made up a story to present her as immaculate and royal. They also called her a virgin who came out of the sea, or that she was the granddaughter of a fish goddess, said to be from Sirius. You can see this with Isis or Isis in Egyptian lore also. It became part of an unholy trinity still recognized in occult beliefs like Wicca, let alone Satanism, the sacred feminine. I'm only noting this because there is no goddess in our worship of Yahweh and Jesus, not to dismiss respect for the Virgin Mary or women in general. Hey, ladies. It's claimed Nimrod took Semiramis as a consort as he absorbed the whole world under his empire, and that's how she's the whore of Babylon, by not being his wife, at least at first. It's hard to piece together Semiramis, but in following her back through other religions of Isis, Ishtar, Ashtoreth, Asherah, and many others, we can see that it's her, or possibly a variety of fallen angels, once we trace it to Samaria, or what is translated as Shinar, or Shinar, shining star, Nimrod's original home kingdom before he started on the Tower of Babel. The name Sumeria is actually Semiramis in rough translation, Sumeria, Semiramis, but another strange coincidence is the name Semjaza from the Book of Enoch, Semiramis, Semjaza. I think that brings her more into focus. She's Satan to simplify. That's who Nimrod's consort really was, the devil. Strange links to her fish goddess story exist in Egyptian lore, Freemasonry, the Dogon tribe of Africa, the Dagon cult, and many other places, and all have a relation to fish people, or mer people. While Sirius is known as the dog star for the dog days of summer, it really ought to be called the fish star since it has much to do with Ishtar as well, a variation of Semiramis, who is as many goddesses as Nimrod has claimed to be gods in history. Semiramis is also conveniently linked with the pentagram and Venus, the morning star, another name for Lucifer. It all links back to Satan or fallen angels. Personally, I think the fallen angels created another deception and psyop here. You can clearly see polytheistic pantheons of gods, fallen ones crop up again like weeds in every single culture after Babylon, and no coincidence. I know there are those who think the fish people represent humans, while draconian reptilian people represent the aliens not of our Creator, but that's all a facade covering the real truth. None of the old gods came from another planet. They were buried in the earth just exactly as it states in scriptures. Semiramis and the fish people are just another part of that deception, and no doubt this is how so many gods are shown with Sumerian lore as well. Were mermaids, minotaurs like Molech, and other creatures merely forms they took as Enoch claimed angels could take form? Hard to say. I won't say for certain if the angels and other purported beings came from other planets, but at the very least they exhibit interdimensional qualities if you read enough about UFO reports and abduction stories. Aliens from Sirius, Orion, or the Pleiades, all conveniently in a straight line from one another, yet nowhere near each other actually, are all a deception to me. The spiritual realm is not found out in space, though I should point out one Bible verse that alludes to the Pleiades specifically. Jesus is referred to as him who holds the 7 stars on a heavenly throne. I don't want to labor a point about aliens in the middle of Nimrod here, but the Dogon tribe also knew of the trinary star system of Sirius somehow. This would create assumptions we're dealing with interstellar visitors, but again, it's said that the Creator also made the stars themselves. It's also mighty convenient that the most recognizable constellation in the sky, Orion, did not become part of the zodiacal calendar. Coincidence? Then there are those claiming ancient cities on the moon and Mars explaining our origins. But regardless of some amazing theories supporting these claims, it doesn't answer the reason for occult societies and witchcraft at the top levels of our society. Why the human sacrifices then? Another topic we'll get to. There is a lot of evidence to support their origin as extra-universal, to coin a phrase. Freemason links to Atlantis, H.P. Lovecraft, and more all support it. Bear in mind, I read a fair amount of science fiction, loved sci-fi movies, and even looked through a telescope a few times in my day, so it's not like I shouldn't be the first person advocating other stars and aliens as the origin of these tales. I'm just sufficing to say, again, that the spiritual realm is not found here, and the first resurrection and revelation may reflect a very material repopulation of the earth, but I have my own belief of the origin of the angels not being found on another planet aside from the bevy of evidence. Back to Nimrod and Babylon, though. Sumeria is seen as the first real culture on Earth because the deluge happened just before, and it took a while for humanity to increase numbers again and create an advanced building culture, whether the result of fallen angels or not. Nimrod's empire is the source of all paganism, and with 200 fallen angels trying to work back into the world as god beings, it's not hard to see how one might be the sun god, another the queen of heaven and the moon, etc., until polytheism is prevalent in all cultures such as the Greeks, Romans, who stole Greek anyway like all else, Vikings, Chinese, Japanese, Indians, both east and west, and on and on. The fallen angels are the reason for those beliefs, numerous gods on earth. This is how we came to have an unholy trinity that still exists in several religions. You can see the symbolism in the father-mother-son pattern of Nimrod, Semiramis, Tammuz, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Zeus, Diana, Dionysus, Jupiter, Venus, Cupid, etc. Nimrod's son Mardon, from Jasher, is Tammuz to many, but also Marduk, Mardon, Marduk. The interesting point is that the sun and moon worship is established in all ancient cultures, but also these characters have fought mighty beasts and even dragons. I'll address that soon also. A part of this unholy trinity includes depictions of the divine son as a little man rather than a baby. That's because it's a very Oedipal relationship in this trinity, with the divine child being the husband who was reborn through his mother wife. Whether this can be traced back before Egypt to Nimrod and Semiramis is actually speculative, but I would surmise it's a practice that existed before the flood, if not Babylon, and this unholy child's conception is anything but immaculate. It's more likely a Nephilim child. You can see the symbolism all over the Vatican, even if depicted as Jesus and Mary. The entire St. Peter's Square is actually the shape of a giant male member, or obelisk, ball shaft. Yeah, just as there's an obelisk in the middle of a radial sun symbol, or solar cross, also considered the Eastern Star of Ishtar, female Freemasons or Fee-Masons. The obelisk is really a giant Nimrod symbol, probably the Asherah pole also. Christmas trees are also derived from this symbol, but we'll get to that later. I know obelisks may represent sun rays or even a lightning rod to a pyramid battery for Atlantis theorists, but it's a Nimrod symbol, possibly all three. The story of Osiris's body parts is more likely Nimrod's story. Most people believe occult science, magic, or even history begins in Egypt, but it predates Egypt and possibly Babylon. The obelisk is often coupled with female symbolism, which is true of most ancient symbology. The unholy trinity may even predate the deluge. Rounding off some points here. Nimrod's real claim to fame is the Tower of Babel. According to Jasher, it took 3 days to circumnavigate. It was so large. Think the size of CERN. No coincidence, in my opinion, if true. The paintings don't do it justice. Here's where the mystery schools come in, though. The only way God would have thought man was getting so out of control or powerful that they were a threat to themselves, because let's face it, they'd be no real threat to Yahweh or God, was if there were fallen angels and black occult magic involved. I'm saying they were taught pre-flood building techniques by the fallen angels, and in so performing rituals may have ended up being possessed. That's why the resurgence of polytheism and making it a totalitarian regime, as the Atlantis I was referring to, were the little green llamas trying to get out and take over again, possibly to escape the Earth itself eventually. This may explain the supposed ancient cities on the moon and Mars, not that we came from there or that aliens built them, just an idea. Anyway, at this point, God decides to send the world off babbling as it's described in the Bible. Babbling is from Babel. Everyone took a little chunk of their secret order and knowledge to their little part of the world. I'll later show how that's been the major cause of world conflicts and empires, but the babbling of languages that God created barriers with also included the witch language, and very likely the Brotherhood of the Snake. Again, pineal gland, pine cone. That's why languages are so vastly different from one another, and also why witch language is always an incoherent rhyming phrase like abracadabra, hocus pocus, mumbo jumbo, blither blather, helter skelter, etc. Alliterations. We'll come back to helter skelter in particular. Every variety of Satanism uses the original black magic of Babylon, whether it's the Church of Satan, Temple of Set, Dark Catholics, or Freemasons. God sent the world off babbling to the four corners of the earth, and that included so-called witch language as much as any other. Personally, I believe in technology, not magic, but magic is off limits, so calling it witchcraft works as much as occult science. So, because of Nimrod and Semiramis, whether Samjaza or not, we have an unholy trinity that's well established in Catholicism because of Emperor Constantine mainly. He wanted peace for his empire, so brought pagans and Christians together into a unified church. You can see a lot of borrowed symbolism, mainly the obelisks. Before I expand on the Catholic side of things and come to the present, I have one more issue to add about Nimrod. My last assertion here is that Nimrod hunted dinosaurs. Yes, dinosaurs, but in Bible code and other history, they're called dragons. Since he is Orion, Gilgamesh, Odin, and many others, probably including Thor as Tammuz, it stands to reason he fought the same dragons and beasts the others were said to have. This is where God setting the world off babbling shows the most in names, but also in lore. You can also see the similarities in stories of Noah and dragons in China, all the way to Europe and across the sea to ancient American cultures. All people in the world were together in Babylon before the Great Babbling, and this is what they took from it. Who could forget dragons? Dinosaurs have been shown to have existed alongside ancient man through so many artifacts that I will only say to go look it up or watch a Kent Hovind seminar. He explains it very well. It doesn't make sense for ancient people to know how to draw intricate details about obvious dinosaurs without actually seeing them. The bones weren't really found and reconstructed until the 1800s, so that's a huge gap of supposed millions of years, word of mouth, and later proof. It doesn't add up. So dinosaurs existed with man. Let's get past that, and also note that if you look at the rough biblical timeline of creationists, that still puts saber-tooths, dire bear, and sloths all in the same rough time frame as Nimrod also. If you want more proof, there are other videos for it. Quite a lot of so-called science is a stretched truth and outright fallacy and can be refuted. So Nimrod the mighty hunter was a giant who killed dragons and worshipped Satan, bringing a lost black magic back into the one world empire at the behest of his demon spirit overlords, the Old Ones. This is Sumeria's Brotherhood of the Snake, later the Synagogue of Satan, relating to the dragon Satan, serpent imagery, and many so-called UFOs, even obelisks and Saturn ring or sun symbols. The Catholic apocryphal text has an interesting story about Daniel defeating a fire-breathing dragon, so even the Chinese dragons, as bizarre as they may seem, may not be so far-fetched as people think. Remember, we have fallen angels trying to escape, take on forms, and even create material things, at least by a mating of some kind with the daughters of men, as it's said. They say Satan is the dragon in the Bible, and there are even supposed dragon bones, I won't get into. These tales may all converge in one truth, though. At the very least, dragons were dinosaurs, yet another symbol you'll find in, guess where, Catholicism. I'll go over that topic soon and the relation to all the occultism, but first I wanted to interject about Nimrod and Christmas before the pagan holidays. The winter solstice is what the sun god worship associated with Nimrod revolves around, and Lucifer is taken to be the sun god because of the orb UFOs I keep bringing up. Sorry if I get redundant, but I assume people will skip sections or it just needs repeating. The Foo Fighters of World War II were released by occult rituals like the Babylon working, which I'll get to, but they are the fallen angels who mated with the daughters of men in whatever context, the same way Mary conceived Jesus. Nimrod was a child of the gods, so to speak, as many feel they are the same by being of the line of Cain and the Canaanites as he was. Giants were assuredly worshipped as gods, like Egyptian pharaohs, but the real gods were the fallen angels mistaken for stars, or in Lucifer the Lightbringer's case, the sun itself. Thus, December 25th became not Christ's holiday originally, but Satan's, because of the winter solstice and sun worship. This is where Nimrod figures into it, whether ancient men considered him the sun god himself or not. So in any case, Nimrod is still responsible for pagan Christmas, solar cross occultism, and the image of Santa Claus. Santa is Satan, not just anagrammatically, and he should be depicted as a giant, much like Nimrod. It's all relative, if a bit confusing. I'll talk about how the evil elves figure into it with the next topic, pagan holidays. I think it should go without saying at this point in my presentation that witchcraft, secret societies, and even demonic possession are still very prevalent in modern society. It's not BS. So to say your kids are being laughed at by Satanists on Halloween, also known as Samhain, is a bit of an understatement. In fact, it's largely promoted for this reason, as well as the gorging of sugar that does have an impact on more than just a person's ability to connect spiritually. Again, pineal gland, if you want. That may sound ridiculous, but pagans and Satanists believe in these things for a reason. You might notice a very large candy aisle in every store for every single holiday, and it's no coincidence. They're not just making candy moguls and dentists richer. It also dumps society down and facilitates mind control for the occult militaries, but we'll get to that. All the major holidays, especially American, involve huge amounts of sugar, but for Halloween in particular, seeing your kid dressed as a gray alien, let alone a vampire, goblin, or witch, makes a Satanist smile. They got to you, and you may think it's just a game. The kids sure do. Just non-sugary food for thought, and here's a connection to their lines of reasoning. Ritual sacrifice of babies has been traced through various ancient religions like of Ishtar, Molech, Baal or Baal, also known as Bel, and others. The Sunday service of Ishtar, the star Sirius, remember, is the original bloodbath of Easter Sunday, though. That day is not at all about Jesus' resurrection, at least to these people, even if the Catholic Church worked it out for the same time period as Passover and the other feast days that Jesus died and was resurrected on. The Ishtar cultists murdered babies on the altar, and the drained blood was used to dye Ishtar or Easter eggs during the Sunday service. I won't comment on the rest of the disgusting ceremony. Sacrificing children is one of the cornerstones to make a Freemasonic link of paganism or Satanism. Remember the unholy trinity I mentioned. It has significance with these holidays outside of Catholicism. And it's well known that Christmas is not actually Jesus' birthday. It's more the celebration of the winter solstice for pagans. Again, this is the result of the Roman Emperor Constantine trying to hold his empire together in favor of pagans rather than Christians. Jesus' birthday is figured sometime near the end of September, based on the birthday of John, who was 6 months apart, and it's shown in Scripture. It's not that hard to figure out. I'm quoting from this site that shows it very well. Assuming John's conception took place near the end of June, adding 9 months brings us to the end of March as the most likely time for John's birth. Adding another 6 months, the difference in ages between John and Jesus brings us to the end of September as the likely time of Jesus' birth. And if it followed one of the Lord's feast days, that might even be on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Take that as you will. And furthermore, Christmas, Christ Mass, is in no way one of the Lord's holy feast days. In fact, Hanukkah was an afterthought of rededicating the Second Holy Temple, and not one of the original holidays either, though it's at least a reasonable holiday. It's just that we were brought up with notions of snow and singing Christmas carols, making it a jolly season. Aside from the fact of it being the only time of year, you can count on people being generous or nice to one another, but shouldn't every day be about Christ in that regard? It's a phony pagan holiday designed by pagans for sun god worship. Harmless as that may seem, it has occult ceremonies intertwined with the solar cross and zodiacal calendar, which people should realize by now also has not one thing to do with Yahweh, Christ, or anything resembling Christianity. That's the pagan calendar, and while people, pagans really, try to bring Christ into it because of the cross, it's a joke on him, a joke on you, and a joke on your kids for becoming greedy from excessive gift giving and fattening up on more sweets. It's about as simple as that, almost. And to add to that, Christmas trees are in fact a variation of the obelisk, just one that any poor person in history could grab from a nearby forest and celebrate a pagan holiday with. An obelisk in your own home. The ornamental bulbs are another male body part, and tinsel has its own pagan origin, but if you want to take it a step further, the original Satan Claus, or Santa, used to run with Krampuses. Krampi sounds ridiculous, or blackjacks who resemble goat demons like Azazel, Baphomet, Samael, or Pan. This is because Santa is derived from Odin, Nimrod, and Lucifer worship, through Sinterklaas and a false notion of St. Nicholas, whom even the Vatican claims never existed. That's because he's Satan, to simplify things. Again, Nimrod, the giant god being of his empire, or child of the gods like Egyptian pharaohs, was serving Lucifer, who I have come to associate with the orb UFOs, described as Foo Fighters during World War II when they first became prevalent in our time. And this video shows what ancient people, giants or not, mistook for being stars, or variations of the sun, perhaps minions, while Lucifer, or Satan, was the sun itself, just a larger version. He is the light bringer, they say. It was the earliest form of psyop to get people to worship them and release them from their prison in the earth with occult rituals. So Nimrod wasn't the sun god, but the winter solstice was the most appropriate time to honor the sun, or Lucifer the Lightbringer, during that season. And if you follow Sumerian legend, Enkidu was like a Krampus or goat demon who I assume was either a fallen angel taking form or one of their genetically manufactured monstrosities. As the Freemasons and Satanists worship these goat demons, I only assume they're fallen angels in disguise, as are the Krampuses of so-called Christmas. It's one of the reasons the Masons are trying to fatten up and dole down children with so much candy, whether Christmas, Easter, Halloween, or even Valentine's Day, yet another derivative of Roman paganism. Odin, who Sinterklaas or Saint Nick is derived from, impregnated mortal women, as all fallen angels were said to, and he also had an 8-legged horse the 8 reindeer were derived from before Rudolph was added. He is Satan, the primeval god, and the sun god of Luciferian winter solstice paganism. Nimrod has just been confused with Odin and Santa, or Satan. He was actually a follower, whether he ended up being deified and confused as such later. It's worth noting that Old Nick is another name for Satan, and St. Nicholas should be the obvious link. The ho 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 is what Satan used to say when entering the stage during old plays. So whether Santa Claus traces to Nimrod or not, that's how we know it's really Satan. It's all relative anyway. He's not the good guy breaking into your house, and the fallen angel watchers probably do see you when you're sleeping. Krampuses are the original elves who beat the bad kids, or worse, and some cultures still celebrate with them. In the original version, they put particularly bad kids in a bag to take home to eat. And in the movie A Christmas Story, they know that the elves are Krampuses, and you can tell by their attitude alone, but also Ralphie is made to climb a pyramid to see Satan in person. The slide to hell is the final touch, full of disappointments for the kids. You'll also note they slipped in the Wizard of Oz, and that has huge links to MKUltra post-hypnotic triggers. There's really a lot you can pick apart about it, but don't mistake that you've been sold a Santa that is really Satan ever since Coca-Cola rebranded him for mass marketing in the early 20th century. And you can see that even in the mid-20th century that Christmas was already a drag on people. It's intended that way because it's Satan's holiday during the cold winter solstice day in hell frozen over. But that is where we get our elves, little green men, leprechauns, gnomes, and other similar depictions from, demons. Are they all variations of Crowley's Law? We keep coming back to them, and it's very likely their intentions have always been to get some unsuspecting dupe of a Nimrod to perform occult magical science to break them out of their abysmal prison. Now let's look more at the Catholic Church and the continuation of paganism. Paganism is where rumors of a light and dark side of Catholicism come from. Again, it's the machinations of Roman Emperor Constantine. There is so much material here. I'm just going to refer you to a website you can look at later for the little details, but the St. Peter Square is one giant obelisk to be seen from space like a Nazca symbol. An obelisk and radial sun symbol, likely of Ishtar, that stems from Nimrod's Babylonian witch schools and or the Brotherhood of the Snake, set the whole pagan stage, and you'll also notice the entirety of the construction faces due west, and that's no coincidence, since that's where sunset is. Set as the Egyptian Satan, still worshipped by many, including psychological warfare specialists in the military like Colonel Michael Aquino, who created the Temple of Set in America. We'll refer to him later about psychological warfare and mind control. The entire square is built this way as a temple of human sacrifice, which I'll elaborate on later. It's why the dead are kept where they are, and I can support this claim by using the Washington Monument. It has an even more obvious construction, faces west also, keeps the dead in the same place, possibly for a reason of evil reincarnation I won't get into, and was built by the same people, the Freemasons. While not identical, they bear the same symbolism of obelisks and female symbols to go with, that can be traced from Egyptian gods to Babylon, and were purposely built to be seen from space by the star gods that so many ancient cultures depict. Or maybe it's to entertain the Amazon Nazis on the moon, who knows. It's purposely offensive because of pagan satanic origins, and I'm sufficing to say Freemasons are Luciferians, at least the ranking portion of them are, and it's hard to imagine the original papacy had no clue what was being built under their noses. I will go so far as to say the X and the O of the monument likely originates within the synagogue of Satan, directly related to the idea of Clyphot, or Clawfoot, whatever, and the mark of the beast. It represents the souls of those who die insane and are sent to the abyss, and this is a big part of the reason that suicide rates are up. Kabbalism is more widely practiced within Freemasonry with the motto of Ordo ab Chao, order out of chaos, related to the gang stalking phenomenon I'll talk more about later, and all the imagery of spirals and X's and O's, which don't mean hugs and kisses, are seen so often now. It also relates to that double V hand sign I showed at the beginning, also meaning 66, which is why Madonna was displaying the symbol during the 2012 Super Bowl halftime show. If you still don't believe that, note that the year 2012 can be decoded as letters spelling Zion. Coincidence? I have a Mark of the Beast montage coming up that adds to this idea. Freemasonry, again stemming from the Tower of Babel or even Atlantis, is where all satanic groups converge, and why Set is included. It all comes down to the rebellious Satan, whom they all worship in various illusory forms, whether Lucifer, Baphomet, or other. And bear in mind, the word Catholic means universal, hinting at the inclusion of all pagan symbology and ritual practices, at least in the dark. It also infers New World Order, which Freemasonry, or if you want to use the word Illuminati, is an integral part of. In the year 70 AD, Antiochus Epiphanes committed what many feel is the abomination of desolation. In anger and humiliation, he sacked Jerusalem and placed a statue of Zeus, also known as Jupiter, in God's temple. Many feel that statue is now sitting in the Vatican, but even if not, there is a museum where all the Roman gods are shown, and the statue of Jupiter is conveniently missing. There is a statue of St. Peter that seems conspicuously like Jupiter, with a sun halo over his head even, and people have kissed his false idol of a foot so much that it's almost rubbed off. If you want more pagan Vatican symbolism about dragons, pine cones, again, pineal gland, Ishtar and Dagon cult miters, then see the Mark of the Beast website later. I'm mainly pointing these things out as the Pope is almost absolutely the Antichrist the Bible mentions, mainly because the papacy is well aware of the light and dark sides of the church coexisting, but also the Pope plays the vicar of Christ, interceding for humanity when that's Christ's job alone. You can also watch a video by Nine Nania later that analyzes every detail of Scripture to reinforce the Pope being the Antichrist. I wish I'd had her knowledge when I wrote this the first time. The Catholic Church is actually the whore of Babylon riding on the back of the New World Order, much as I'd like to say it's the USA itself for several reasons that should be obvious. We're the worst example in the world and the most evil military aggressors, just for starters. The Romans and the synagogue of Satan, the phony Jews who Jesus mentioned in the Bible, were already carrying on Babylonian traditions by the time Jesus was born. When Constantine brought the folds together, he was bringing satanic Babylonian witchery to Christians. All their child sacrifices, pedophilia, and other evil practices are all done in secret, often beneath churches, if you believe the stories of nuns who've spoken out. This is where the black-veiled brides really come from. Catholic priests aren't always after the kids. Sometimes they take nuns as unofficial brides, and their sinful pregnancies are usually, if not always, human sacrifices whose bones line the walls and floors beneath churches. Believe it or don't. You didn't really think mortals could exist as bastions of piety and celibacy that you tell your innermost secrets to, do you? Many are actually children of God. This isn't a total blanket statement, but you can bet the dark side is preying on the ignorant lighter half. Worship has been practiced on the wrong day of the week for centuries to suit the pagan half. Sundown Friday to sundown Saturday is the real Sabbath. Excuse it as you like. The idea of Christ in the church may seem like the focus, but all of God's appointed times have been altered in the extreme. The pagan rituals still exist and often right in your face, and popes still sit on thrones of gold because they hail the all-seeing eyeball as much as any other major institution does in the past or present, the synagogue of Satan. They're all puppets, and the Freemasons are right there with them because they built most churches. They are bed buddies. The steeple is also an obelisk to show how far they've taken the symbolism into the mainstream of Christianity. See the parallel symbolism everywhere in Europe and America. Many Freemasons are Catholics for these reasons. The synagogue of Satan, the evil side of Judaism, has been around longer than Catholicism. I've no doubt they helped form and build Catholicism through the emperors of Rome. To show how this works, we'll just sample History of the World Part 1 by Mel Brooks. It's a perfect example of the deception of real history held over your heads. Mel Brooks' satanic handlers in Hollywood, and they all have them, even directors, had him make fun of Jewish Holocaust by using the Spanish Inquisition. This shows the parallels between the synagogue and Catholicism, actually, as told by, in my own opinion, a phony Jew. His handlers would have had him use World War II instead if it hadn't happened so recently when this movie was made. Think about it. It all adds up with the Roman scenes, Jews in space that would become Spaceballs, and even the French Revolution the Rothschild Illuminati helped to promote. We'll focus more on the Illuminati origins in a bit, but suffice it to say, this deception and conspiracy is all due to Satan keeping his minions of various cults, pseudo-religions, and sects under one banner. And they all work together in various ways, whether it's architecture, entertainment meant to distract or deceive you, or even mass rituals. If you're a well-meaning Catholic, I apologize, but you're being deceived by Satanists who play the Pied Piper in the name of Christ. They perform demon rituals in secret, and yet another reason for so-called alien activity so prevalent in our time. I'm getting to the alien deception as we go here. Aliens are demons, and I can prove that as much as possible anyway. And again, child sacrifices performed in secret, the next topic. Before I move on to the next chapter, I wanted to share this image I found. While I can't verify it being correct, I do have to say that the other Illuminati political pyramid images I use don't tend to include the Vatican at all, as if it were a non-entity. Maybe it's part of a psyop, who knows, but I do have to say that while it seems certain the Pope as a figure does fit the prophecy of the Antichrist, again, watch that 9 Narnia video, he should be included in these power structures people are making flowcharts and schematics for. Another interesting note was that the Vatican means divining serpent, or prophecy, leaving room for the Vatican itself to be the false prophet next to the Pope. In that case, they should be at the top of the pyramid, while the Rothschilds and other Illuminati bloodlines should be beneath them, as well as other political power bases. The Roman Empire and Church have been gathering money for centuries. I'll come back to this point again when I talk about the common story behind the Illuminati. I found an interesting website I'll share that speaks about this very point, but make no mistake, the church is the hidden element behind this satanic beast system, becoming more openly prevalent in our time. You may think I'm full of BS about the sacrifices, but let me interject that there's a video you can watch about snuff parties a member of the rock band The Scorpions happened to be at. Look it up. I've no doubt most parties like those would be held by the elite who have every bit of a clue how this hidden world works. Also, let me read you a little blurb from a news article. Children and blacks make up a disproportionate percentage of missing persons reported each year. In 2013, people under 18 made up nearly 3/4 of the missing persons reported, but only 23% of the population. Blacks, while accounting for 13% of the population last year, comprised 35% of the missing, according to Wall Street Journal analysis of the FBI data and census population estimates. Yeah, I know the journal, but it's pretty much the same everywhere you read. And this image of the 2014 data is basically the same, and the ratios of missing children to adults is shocking. Coincidence? Children have always been the first sacrifices, mainly because their pure innocence and blood have always been considered greater energy for rituals. And these rituals don't have to be performed beneath churches or in particular places. Sometimes they happen as events like 9/11, the World Trade Centers, which I'll show a little more about as we go. There's a video where Rabbi Finkelstein not only talks about sacrificing kids and drinking the blood of their enemies, I'm assuming the synagogue of Satan, but also handing the bodies off to places like McDonald's, where they're mixed up into the meat. He claims this is done in many places, and he's smugly blunt about it. It's not for the squeamish, but it does add to my point about this subject. It's why they made the obelisks at the Vatican and in Washington, D.C. This is a big part of Satanism as a symbol. Egypt has always been the focus because of the pyramids and the supposed Atlantis, but it also reflects practices revived in ancient Babylon, likely by the Brotherhood of the Snake, particularly the baby killing you can see in the rituals of Ishtar. Again, Easter, the original sunrise service of the spring equinox and sun worship, started off as a sickening ritual that ended with infanticide, whether you believe it had anything to do with the mysterious character Semiramis or not. And while in our time it's masked as a merciful alternative for population control, I won't start on a rant about Planned Parenthood or abortion, aside from it being a giant ass-kissing contest to suck up to their fictitious Medusa goblin goddess. They feel the same way toward Christ and Christianity, but Christ and the God of the Israelites weren't fallen angel criminals bound in the earth for transgressions against humanity and DNA, or their creation. That's one reason theirs is an earth goddess anyway. She's bound in it, or at least was, before all these demonologists started ritually extracting the fallen angels from the abyss. It has nothing to do with nature, sick human nature or other, and they didn't have overpopulation in the days of Babylon or Ishtar when all these practices first began anyway. All the hype of abortionists and goddess worshippers of whatever pagan faith just use it as an excuse to please the dark angels who command infanticide, murder because it's against God. I won't say it's something they wouldn't do to their own children either, while gladly handing over the poor or quote-unquote useless people. They might sell their own to Satan even more. And personally, even without God in the equation, I could never picture taking the life of a child even before they're able to form thoughts. That's just natural to me. Not to say I wouldn't take a life to defend a child or my own. I think all these satanic freaks should help the overpopulation problem by sacrificing themselves before anyone else, if that's their goal. It's not like we'll be saving their souls with a pearl of wisdom or an alternative point of view. Remember what I said about the Benaiah Nephilim and the lineage of Cain. These people are inherently evil, and I'll prove that simply through epigenetics. It's been proven that people carry certain genetic markers that can be compared across demographics, and that is likely where they get the sins of the fathers reference in the Bible onto the third or fourth generation, at least. It more likely carries on further as these kinds of people breed amongst themselves, and these markers would include obvious comparable offenses like pedophilia, murder, torture, theft, and more. It's a fundamental for Satanists to go out of their way to break all 10 commandments every week. That's like bragging rights to them, and their evil overlord demands sacrifices among all else. It's so normal to them after so many generations that between their elite snobbery and seeing us all as goyim or human cattle, they have absolutely no compunction for doing these things at all. Child murder and sacrifice still exist, let alone everything else these grotesque caricatures of humanity perform, and it is all done in the name of the all-seeing eyeball, representing the Illuminati and Lucifer. To round off this topic and the previous one, I'll include a montage of marks of the beast, or X. This symbol has so many meanings, from the symbol for the abyss, ascension rituals for secret societies like the Masons and OTO, the lightning flash indicative of Lucifer I mentioned previously, and more, but I think it can be simplified as a symbol of death. Symbolic overload is a part of the Great Deception. Not only were demonic contracts signed with an X during the very long age of illiteracy, but it's also a tally for the dead, or human sacrifices to the dark angels, especially children. This is why even Disney and Nickelodeon have to add their own symbolism to this age where everything, and I do mean everything, has to be extreme and marked with an X. I'll talk more about Disney and Nickelodeon later, and how they're indoctrinating children with media mind control. It's a part of this beast system we're all being dragged into. Generation X is an undefined generation, unlike predecessors, because it was never meant to live long enough to name another generation. This plot I'll be explaining next has been ongoing for centuries, while the Benaiah Nephilim children have always sought world domination. But I think the mark of the beast itself is captured best with the Catholic Church's Ash Wednesday and the placing of the mark on the foreheads of the congregation. It fits all other biblical prophecy of who the Antichrist would be, as well as their association with the whore of Babylon. Even for Jesus it meant death, which is celebrated by many of these hidden witches in society. But the church plays no small part in what is called the Illuminati or the New World Order, and they all hail one master, the all-seeing eye of the Watchers, and Lucifer, the sun god and leader of the fallen angels. This is really who seeks world domination and whose mark of sacrificial death it is. I'm giving the shortest version of the Illuminati possible to get you up to speed if this is news to you. There's a great article you can read at Vigilant Citizen or find Myron Fagan's Illuminati video. While many will associate the Illuminati with the Rothschild family mainly, or the 13 elite Illuminati bloodlines, the Bilderberg Group, the Committee of 300, even the U.S. government and or military, there is a pyramidal power structure, inverted or not, that caps off with the Eye of Lucifer or Horus to some. The Bible speaks of this being Satan's world and why we shouldn't love it, meaning not being absorbed into the system, money especially, and it's because the eye is a representation of the Watchers spoken of in the book of Enoch, who these groups pander to in order to retain their wealth and power over the populace. I already showed what fallen angels are, but this is who they all serve in whatever form, because as I said in the beginning, many of these people feel they are of the line of Cain, the B'nai HaNephilim, and fallen angels. They believe that they're actually related to the giants, mainly through Noah's son Ham, his son Mizraim, who settled Egypt, and why the focus on Egypt in Freemasonry, and also the Canaanites. These bloodlines obviously have roots before Egypt, Babylon, and even the so-called Atlantis before the deluge. So this isn't just a phony Jewish conspiracy, the Catholic Church, or unofficial Nazi Fourth Reich. While America and its military does comprise a large portion of the NWO, it very much includes all worshippers of the Eye and the fallen ones on Earth. So to keep this simple, I've only included the basic backstory of the Illuminati created during the Age of Enlightenment, which means these beings of light, like Lucifer, and not really the Pinal Third Eye. It's really about empowering their so-called daddy, Satan, or one of the fallen angels at least. There were 200, remember, and no doubt they got around to many cultures. The Illuminati formed in Bavaria on May 1st, 1776, under the newly formed House of Rothschild, bankers, and a former Jesuit priest named Adam Weishaupt. It's important to note he was born Jewish before he worked through the priesthood, then was groomed by the Illuminati Satanists. Obviously, he was a dark Catholic to begin with. Their link to Freemasonry is by infiltrating lodges of the Grand Orient, which have a conspicuous connection to the OTO I mentioned previously, also founded in the same part of the world, Germany or Austria, and obviously having some relation to the Orient in name. Coincidence? They began by creating revolts in places, but really pushed for the American Revolution to weaken the British Empire, note the date they formed. Then through Robespierre, sparked the French Revolution to weaken that empire. They played the nations of Europe against one another by funding both sides of the Napoleonic Wars, so they'd clean up financially and would expand their political power base. This is how the game Stratego became necessary to box and ship, in my own opinion. They later added such figures to their Masonic lineup as Albert Pike, who wrote a famous must-read for Masons called Morals and Dogma, specifically citing Lucifer, but he also helped strategize the future goals of the Illuminati that would create world wars as a means for their final world domination. First, they inspired revolt in Russia to lay the foundation for communism, the hidden hammer you may have heard of, the Rothschilds and Illuminati bloodlines. This was their testbed system for a proletariat class that would actually be ruling the plebeians in secret, using a secret police like the KGB. The Illuminati also set off World War I, and it said World War II, even though Hitler was apparently against the Rothschilds, and even tried to imprison some of them. Maybe he just wanted power all for himself. The Illuminati sparked the world wars by taking Nietzscheism and turning it into fascism for World War I, then later into Nazism for World War II. They were hoping all the new weaponry, which many feel was the result of a supposed alien saucer crash in Germany in 1936, but possibly a psyop and more likely from demon rituals, would actually cause so much destruction and chaos that humanity would decay into a mongrelized form of degenerates they could gather up and make slaves out of, or food maybe. Satanists are weird like that, kids. Remember, they're possessed, and their so-called spirit guides are trying to use them to take over humanity and treat us as slaves, possibly even leave the earth if possible, because of their fallen angels and demons. Just because the Bible reads the way it does doesn't stop them from trying. Anyway, the Illuminati were quick to form the United Nations in lieu of a League of Nations at the end of World War II, with the primary focus being the formation of Israel in 1948. They've been hoping that ancient hostilities would have ignited World War III by now, and all the Cold War tension in the Middle East, including the arming of nations, is being forced by the hidden hammer that created most political ideologies to begin with, even our precious America. And they had a lot to do with the genocide of indigenous Americans, let's say, regardless of it all being blamed on the U.S. military complex of the 1800s. But since nothing they've tried for total world domination has worked yet, they've tried using Hegelian dialectic tactics, problem-reaction solutions, to promote chaos like 9/11, false flag school shootings to promote gun control, and more. The gun control is to disarm and weaken the populace, as they did in Nazi Germany. They also put sodium fluoride in our water to make us docile, like in Nazi Germany. Many know about that already, but there are reasons why. They're Illuminati tactics for social engineering, provocations to war, and even social entropy. I'll even go so far as to say they promoted McCarthyism in America. It might have been a reason for war if people were incited enough, but the Illuminati enjoy infighting every bit as much. Their plans are somewhat laid out right there for everyone to see on the Georgia Guidestones. They want a population under 500 million that can be controlled as slaves mostly. Most of the elite are slaves to the eye already, but not everyone will share in their grand vision of the Illuminati future. I'm positive of that. The rest will be slaves and probably food to the top 1% of the 500 million. The Guidestones paint a pretty picture for an elite few, but like everything else, it's a deception for even the very evil elect. So their plot is still ongoing. All that Agenda 21 hype is just that, hype. I'm going to show how they created the New Babylon after World War II when their plans for the mongrelized humanity failed, and how they're fulfilling Bible prophecy instead. And in creating the New Babylon, their whore is the Catholic Church, as I stated. One of the ways they're recreating Babylon that I should mention is by piecing back together all the lost knowledge of Babylonian occultism, and that's been one primary reason for empire building throughout history. They've strong-armed into lands only to retrieve occult magic and arts, much like after starting a war in Iraq that did make sense. 2 years later, they found Gilgamesh's tomb, assumed to be Nimrod, of course. Saddam Hussein thought he was Nebuchadnezzar reincarnate and had already been trying to dig up and rebuild Babylon. So the Illuminati used the American goons to go in and take everything of value. I'm saying that's more a reason than drugs, oil, or any corporate contracts to these people. Occult knowledge, magic. If and when they piece it all back together, they may be as dangerous as God saw Nimrod's people before sending them all off babbling. Finding Nimrod's tomb must have been a holy grail to them. And just as an aside, Rob Skiba mentioned in one of his videos that there is always the potential for them to clone Nimrod and recreate him as an Antichrist. I agree more with Nainania's interpretation of scriptures, but it's still possible, Antichrist or not. If the Antichrist is your subject, then also check out Maitreya and Benjamin Creme. His links to Theosophy, Madame Blavatsky, and New Age philosophy should clue you in, though. It's all related to Aleister Crowley and eventually Satanism and Lam. I guess we'll know who the Antichrist is when blood is spilled on the Temple Mount. As a final side note, Illuminati, broken down, is Sick Mother Naughty, and I'm going to show how appropriate that actually is after the next couple of topics. You might not think it's so stupid after you hear about what they're doing with mind control. Another final point I almost forgot. You should also see the 21 Goals of the Illuminati and the Committee of 300 by Dr. John Coleman. I've included an image with the simplified version of their plans for a one-world government and religion, destroying existing religions, particularly Christianity, psychotronically mind-controlling the public, making everything that's abominable to God into an art form in the minds of the public. I already showed how bestiality was legalized in Canada and other material. Depopulating the earth, suppressing knowledge and science, partly why I made this, creating wars, and not the least of which created in our own homes. It's the breakdown of the family often talked about, and it's largely through media and a form of hypnosis created through negative reinforcement. Again, Sick Mother Naughty. Anyway, take a look at that later if you haven't already. Now let's take a look at the Babylon working of Aleister Crowley's Babylon Bunch.
Mr. Speaker, Vice President Cheney, members of Congress, distinguished citizens and fellow citizens. Every year, by law and by custom, we meet here to threaten the world. The American flag stands for corporate scandals, recession, stock market declines, blackmail, terror, burning with hot irons, dripping acid on the skin, mutilation with electric drills, cutting out tongues, and rape. Our first goal is to show utter contempt for the environment. I have sent you a comprehensive energy plan to devastate communities, kill wildlife, and burn away millions of acres of treasured forests. This government is taking unprecedented measures to protect our people and defend our homeland. And this year, for the first time, we must offer every child in America 3 nuclear missiles.
Aleister Crowley, yes, I said Crowley, the Beast 666, actually preached love amongst all his satanic nonsense. I think love is about the last thing involved in a black sex magic ritual, and most of them seem to be that. The Babylon working is no exception, and it all revolves around one simple idea: kicking God off of his heavenly throne, whether from a personal or more wide-reaching perspective. This is why Revelation in the Bible is all about Babylon, if figuratively. I mentioned the Illuminati witches gathering up all the lost occult knowledge from Nimrod's Babylon at the end of the last segment. This is partly how we arrived at the New Babylon with New Age philosophies, which Crowley helped promote, and Satanism creating an environment devoid of God, Elohim, Yahweh, or Yeshua, Jesus to most. While there may be many truths in what's practiced in these belief systems, there's a reason we were never meant to know. Man is now his own God for the most part in this society, especially in the USA, and as I also mentioned with Dr. John Coleman's book, removing established religions from the mainstream is key to their domination. Instilling the value of man being God is how the New World religion will be easily accepted by most people. It's mostly already established, and few can see it. It's the New Age, the new religion, the one world religion. Even Satanism borrows most of the same philosophies as New Age, another deception. The problem is, man is too ignorant and far too egotistically animalistic to be playing God for anyone, let alone himself. It's also partly because of the negative spirituality surrounding us that we're largely ignorant of. Call it the devil if you want, but it's the opposite of intelligent design, to simplify. Part of how this happened is because several deities of history and prehistory all share certain qualities: born of a virgin, usually around the winter solstice, Christmas, healing the sick, casting out demons, etc. These are all the same attributes of Jesus, and this is how many have assumed or asserted that Jesus was a fictional character created by the phony Jews and Romans to begin with, and why there is no God of any kind sitting on a throne of heaven, Jesus or other. As I said, Jesus was presumably born of a virgin, the same way fallen angels mated with the daughters of men to create Nephilim. It's all relative and easy to mistake them all being the same character because of this. God was only redirecting our course of development after the mistake of the Nephilim. Most of these beliefs mainly revolve around the story of the Egyptian gods Horus and Set, waging war against one another like God and the devil. This is how Colonel Aquino promoted the Temple of Set in the military, among others like him in society, though it's yet another deception. Horus and Set are both fallen angels. Ra is the sun god, and yet another deception for a dark angel to be worshipped, Lucifer, and all this is important to know to understand who Babylon really is and what Crowley's intentions really were, whether he was deceived himself or not. This deception is how I'm also asserting Yeshua, Jesus, is still sitting on the heavenly throne because he was given it by the Father. The Babylon working was just another excuse to promote man to that position, but mainly for the fallen angels to create chaos and dissension so that we'll all be taken to the lake of fire with them when Yeshua finally gets fed up soon. And they're not ignorant of the story. It's the great deception. Babylon is the Scarlet Woman, as in Masonic Red Woman, Great Mother or Mother of Abominations, a goddess found in the mystical system of Thelema. She's also identified with Mother Earth, the witches or druids, but also the sacred whore. As Crowley wrote, she rides astride the beast. In her left hand she holds the reins, representing the passion which unites them. In her right she holds aloft the cup, the Holy Grail, aflame with love and death. Again, as I said elsewhere, psychological implications of sex and death. And remember, the Catholic Church symbolically represents the whore of Babylon, riding the back of the NWO, as well as the Pope being the Antichrist. Again, there is scripture to back that up. It's all a sign of the end times. I don't want to delve into the occult specifics, but the idea of the ritual was to summon her, the avatar of the original whore of Babylon, maybe even in the form of an old god like Lam. But they are of a spiritual, extra-universal origin, and these dark magicians are fully aware. I talked about there possibly being female angels in other material from a passage in Enoch, so no doubt this was also Crowley's thinking. Not all fallen angels were necessarily males. Her name is a play on words to mean Babylon, but is no doubt pronounced like Baba, the Eastern honorific title meaning father or wise old man, which could mean Lucifer actually, yet another deception. Note the big pyramid and sun on Crowley's fat head, but this brings me back to my point about the church being the whore of Babylon. If Rome has been riding the back of the world all this time, especially since Mussolini allowed the Vatican to become a city-state, then the spirit of the whore of Babylon was with us all along anyway. But while the church plays this symbolic role of the whore, we've seen an increase of demonic possession, violence, perversion including legal bestiality, possibly being followed by a new push for pedophilia, and just general negative emotions and attributes being portrayed as progressive human behavior, as if to say past generations were just ignorant or something. I personally believe the Babylon working, among other rituals like 9/11, have brought greater and greater negative energies down on humanity, whether that means releasing fallen angels like Lam or every demon spirit out of the abyss. I think it shows just in what's on TV or at the movies alone, the constant absorption of negative imagery like in A Clockwork Orange that's only becoming more and more acceptable in the mainstream. Kids grow up with it, so it's normal to them by the time they are so-called mature. I'll talk more about this again in the mind control chapter. Anyway, since Crowley was too old to complete the ritual, it ended up being worked out by Jack Parsons of Jet Propulsion Labs, a rocket scientist, strange, and L. Ron Hubbard of Dianetics and Scientology fame. Obviously, those self-help books of his were meant to make man think of himself as his own god, and I think Parsons having Antichrist on the cover of his own book is its own tell-all. This is also how people end up being rich and famous, as I talk about in my MK Ritual Satanic Murders video, by worshipping Satan, Lucifer, Semjaza, or whatever name he's using this year. Believe it or don't. The Babylon ritual was one of a disgusting black sex magic nature performed from 1945 to 46. They had a woman in red, a Masonic symbol we'll also talk more about later, involved in the ceremony, Marjorie Cameron, and it's very possible they contacted an entity like Lam, or several maybe. I think they very much did cause an influx of demons in the guise of aliens, and I'm also going to show at least partly how they were successful in pushing forward the new Babylon. The participants were members of the OTO, but here's a quote from another member. A gateway for the great old ones has already been established and opened by members of the OTO who are on rapport with this entity. Kenneth Grant, OTO. He meant Lam, or demons like it, with the word entity, and they were obviously already making friends with the fallen angels. I don't believe they did all this alone, or just for Growley. It's been rumored, we'll say, that they performed the ritual at a site that would later become Area 51, which would make sense if you understand that everything they do is with a numerological purpose, because 5 + 1 equals... This could be linked to the CERN logo. 6 is a very important number to them, and Satanism in general. Again, the hexagram, as above, so below. In any case, the Illuminati most likely had their hidden hand or hammer in this ritual somehow. It's also interesting that the symbol they used is based on 7s, a heptagram, and for a few reasons I believe possible. Obviously, there are 7 letters in Babylon. It might also be the reason for the 7th symbol needed in the movie Stargate, needing a point of origin, and also because of the year this may have been meant to revolve around, actually, the Jewish year 5777, or 2017, both 7s. Just postulating. 777 is obviously a number of God to most people, the number of completion, as opposed to the devil, but in the case of the Babylon sigil, the 7 supposedly add up to a numerological value for the unholy sacred feminine. There are some very creepy relationships to the number 7 in 2016 also, some of which you can see in this video by KJ Osborne, which I happened to see released as I was rewriting this. Coincidence? The city of Astana, looking like a pentagram on Google Earth, might be the creepiest part of that video. And supposedly, if you take a circular resonator and play a G through it, you'll get a perfect heptagram, which would have Freemasonic links to the idea of sacred geometry, the real reason for the letter G in Freemasonry. But for the idea of 7 as a sound, though, this is why music is so important to satanic mind control, the natural harmonics and frequencies of the universe, particularly satanic rock music. This video shows how the interior chambers of a Giza pyramid are thought to be acoustic chambers, tuned to an A letter created in the shape of a pyramid and first letter of the alphabet, no coincidence. Again, think of the sonic and or magnetic device Edward Leeds Skolman used to build the Coral Castle by himself. My point here is that these rituals are not just about drawing a symbol on the ground, chanting randomly, adding other disgusting practices, and hoping a demon will pop up. It has to do with superstring theory, universal harmonics, and more than just numbers or focusing spiritual energy. This isn't just babbled hocus pocus. It's ancient occult science being hidden from a dumbed-down public, and it all ties together. The heptagram isn't just about a sign or a number. I believe it's a progression of numerology, starting with the pentagram, then hexagram, and finally heptagram, the 7 or number of completion for God, who these satanic occultists are trying to usurp the throne of. They want to be God, so they will use his number to cap their pyramid for the New World Order. Gray aliens have become the norm since the time of this ritual in 1945 to 46, if that's the term we can use anymore. Quite a lot happened in the time period, and no coincidence, after bringing all the Nazi occultism from World War II into the complete fold of the Illuminati United Nations established in 1945. Nuclear bombs were first used in 1945. Kenneth Arnold helped create the term flying saucers in 1947, then Roswell happened just 1 month later, though that's been called a psyop by many. Mirandajo, a seemingly invulnerable Superman, was said to have spirit guides, conveniently, in 1947. He died of strange circumstances, and I'll add that he could have been one of the first Nazi super soldiers in secret, as well as one of the first MK-Ultra test subjects, if not possessed. And don't forget, UN Israel was recreated in 1948, though we're fighting for it in 1947 as all this was happening. In 1947, the Lateran Pacts were incorporated into the Constitution of Italy, finalizing the Vatican City statehood. And the Catholic Church claims that aliens can't sin for not having been born human or on Earth. They would even bless the aliens. Take that as you will. And one last coincidence, the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, a psychological warfare organization for the British military, was established in 1946. I believe Crowley's cronies were very successful in their Babylonian ritual that would hasten the spiral down into the vortex of societal entropy. It's even been suggested that while Crowley was able to close the breach after contacting Lam, they weren't able to do so after the Babylon working, so the demonic floodgates are wide open. Maybe that's really why Area 51 is considered so alien-oriented. They're just guarding the Stargate now. Many also speculate that nuclear bomb tests are for creating rifts in space-time to allow these negative entities into our universe, and given the ridiculous number of tests since the 1940s, it's very possible. In any case, I believe they allowed these beings to escape their prison, the one spoken of in Enoch and the Bible. Genies grant wishes when conjured up, remember? And in all the stories, they always give more than the conjurer bargains for. It's always a deception. And in the Bible, Satan, Lucifer, the devil, Old Nick, or whomever, is bound in the earth with a 70-generation sentence that ends in our general time frame. And I think it's a given that through rites and ceremonies, Satanists all have spirit guides, demons really, or jinn. It's what consumes them, like a disease, like a hive mind consciousness responsible for today's beast system, because it's these beings they're letting out that help them only in a bid to escape God's prison in the earth, as I keep saying. They may claim the star Sirius or the Andromeda Galaxy for their origin, but this always comes back to Satan's demons, and possibly the spirits of the Nephilim as well, trying to break out and take it on the lam. And this might be one of the reasons for demons needing to possess people. These are other dimensional or extra-universal beings, masters of space and time by most accounts, whether Christian, Illuminati, OTO, Nazi, or other. Believe it or don't. Aliens are a very easy sell since we've been beaten over the head with them in movies, even misleading garbage like Paul, but also the fact of advancements in astronomy and the realization of other worlds. It just makes sense for UFOs to be from elsewhere in the cosmos, and calling them extraterrestrials adds a clinically detached, scientific warp to the deception. We've also been beaten over the head with the idea of time being in the billions, the age of the Earth mainly, by people like Carl Sagan.
Trillions, million, billion, 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 million, million.
I could expand on this deception, but not here. It's been made so normal to dismiss demons and spirits entirely as religion gets pushed further into the realm of ridicule. We're purposely being taught to acknowledge parallel universes, even time travel being possible. But not that there might be truth in scriptures or even folklore that a spiritual realm might exist. If man didn't create it or can't manipulate it, it doesn't exist. Again, the school of man being his own God. There's a left brain shift of consciousness happening provided by the MK social construct I'll talk about next, which includes things like the idea of a flat earth, also provided by the Illuminati hypno-wizards. I know many will resist that idea, but go look through a telescope and note the curvature of shadows on the moon or other planets just for starters. Those are not two-dimensional discs pointed at you, and the Earth is not the center of the universe. Your perception of reality is crucial to their control of the societal network. By now I shouldn't have to argue how aliens can be demons, and people like Bill Cooper were doing this long ago. If you watch Bill Cooper's videos, just bear in mind, that after a while he realized he was being misled about the aliens he was exposing along with the government cover-up. He knew wholeheartedly they were demons just like I'm presenting here. Again, rocket scientists performing rituals raises a few red flags. The whole thing is a deception, and you can see where people are most confused by the types of UFOs that are seen. The Nazis had Vril saucers for a very long time. To say they haven't improved on the technology by now would be plain stupid. So no doubt between that and experimental military aircraft, there are a lot of misleading reports of UFOs. But there are also the orb and serpent UFOs, often making right-angle turns at hundreds of miles an hour, or even thousands, and just disappearing off of radar entirely. A couple of Project Blue Book researchers finally concluded they were demonic, especially the orb and possibly serpent UFOs, because they defied rational explanation. If they were spacecraft, they were definitely something alive with their own consciousness. There is also all the evidence of abductions that lends itself to the idea of interstellar or intergalactic visitors, but if you look at enough reports, you can easily substitute demons in about every case. Just because material things happen doesn't mean they came from another planet. I'm saying they were let out of their earthbound prison in demon rituals, and tormenting humanity is just what they do because they have no way to leave the earth. Gray aliens, whether fallen angels in disguise or Nephilim hybrids, are often said to just walk through walls, and that's not very material. Is it technological or an attribute of theirs? Hard to say. It wouldn't much matter if they were from another planet anyway. They act just as demonically toward us as you'd expect from Bible scripture. Alien abductions are another deception. Who flies billions of light years across the cosmos just to brandish medieval medical weaponry to scare someone to death with? And by that I mean the Travis Walton story mainly, but other reports also. Didn't they bring laser tools or nanotechnology? Why does it always reflect what we already know and have? It's all a big sham to deceive us and keep the alien agenda working. To help prove that, I'll cite the TV show Ancient Aliens. The cover here speaks volumes, with the pyramids being used as a battery by the scary alien saucer, gathering up energy with lightning bolts. That bolt is a huge symbol in Satanism, as with Nazi Germany, but also Lucifer. This cover actually reflects deceptions about Atlantis I mentioned before also, but what really sells the Ancient Aliens deception is the fact of who produces the show. It's made by, dun dun dun, Prometheus Entertainment. Prometheus. And if you know his story, then you know he's the light bringer, just like Lucifer is to the Masons. That's the symbolism other Masons are supposed to catch and know it's part of the scam. Prometheus was chained to a rock, just like I'm saying Satan was bound in the earth, or Hades as told in the Bible. To sum up, Ancient Aliens is a scam regardless of the well-meaning intentions of their guest speakers. It's who runs it that's scamming you into believing in aliens building all the old temples. Again, refer to the giants mentioned before. That's who more likely built them, or helped at least. Your aliens aren't from Sirius, Orion's Belt, or Betelgeuse, Betelgeuse, or even the Pleiades, though again the Bible does refer to him who holds the 7 stars, which is a big coincidence to note. But I'm asserting that's not their home. Again, extra universal. As with the X-Files, they just want you to keep looking for that truth way, way out there, when it was right under your feet and in Bible scripture all along. I'll discuss more of these things in other videos. It's all a great deception. There's also the Disclosure Project to deceive you, created by the Illuminati, no doubt, and funded by the Rockefellers. They claim the governments know of 60-ish alien races, right? 60 kinds of Nephilim, maybe, and have alien technology. Yeah. Rockefellers, NWO. Coincidence? I'm sure it's all true, though. The satanic military obviously deals with these beings, and according to Bill Cooper, had made a treaty where the government would get technology in exchange for abducting people here and there for quote-unquote study, as if they didn't know us well enough already. That sounds about like what everyone else performs rituals for, hoping to conjure up a demon, make a contract, and then go get rich and famous. For scientists, it's just for occult knowledge mainly. Bill Cooper was right, and the Illuminati knew it, so they ended up killing him in November 2001. He also predicted 9/11 and why they wouldn't let him talk anymore. There was even talk that Roswell had children in the crash, not gray aliens, and it was covered up because children are abducted for experimentation, possibly the Nephilim hybrid kind. Whether those experiments happen on Earth or on the moon is speculative, as much as by humans rather than aliens, but there is reason to believe there is a moon base for more reasons than fleets of some type of craft that have been seen in the skies as in this video here. Where else would they be going? Mars? You can also see this video on my playlist. The aliens are demons, and the ship of fools keep letting them out in exchange to get ahead in the world. They even tell you about the possession, with movies like Stargate backing up my hexagram and Babylon references somewhat. Clearly I've shown how orb UFOs are fallen angels in disguise. It's as simple as that if you follow all I've said before. I wanted to preface this section with an image of the data centers considered used to administer the gang stalking networks in the U.S., presumably similar in other countries outside the United States also. This is the NWO behind all this, but it should go without saying it's all very militarily controlled. I thought of all things I'm presenting here, it might be the most help in understanding some of the epic and biblical chaos going on in the world right now. I'll discuss the Phoenix and order out of chaos in the next chapter, but to define all the chaos the world is seeing right now in one word, that word would have to be Satanism, or maybe Luciferianism, as this does relate directly to the sun god, dating from well before Egypt. If you skip directly to this section, you won't take that as seriously as those who didn't, I'm sure, but that is why the mind control and gang stalking, also known as surveillance role-playing, are happening. A prime goal, if not the #1 goal of Satanism, is to control the minds of the rest of the public. And before I get too far, let me reiterate how the Illuminati elite feel about the lower actual working classes. We're goyim, or human cattle, or even insects to the phony Jew elite, or lab rats or mice to be experimented on by the unofficial Nazi Fourth Reich, Aryan Brotherhood, and even eaten by Minervan owl worshippers. Owls eat mice. To the Catholic Mafia and pagans, we're slaves to be bullied and treated as animals just the same. And as I showed before, Washington, D.C. was once called Rome, so that may offer a clue as to whose hidden hand might have been in the U.S. military from day one. It's not all a Jew conspiracy, as so many believe. You might even call them all the Brotherhood of the Snake. There are many controllers and handlers in the satanic mind control networks, filtering down through the ranks of the pyramid. Controlling the public is now possible with electronics, also referred to as psychotronics, but control is also fed into our brains through media, particularly television, the original indoctrination device, and even the likes of Disney. Yes, kids are being brainwashed into slaves of a satanic state and made into lab rats, hence Mickey Mouse. This also has a lot to do with the gang stalking phenomenon many TIs or targeted individuals are dealing with right now. It's a subject worth checking out if you feel you might be a part of it and didn't know. MK Ultra, or Mind Control Ultra, was designed to create robot slaves, mind-controlled assassins, but no doubt had initially been planned as a social engineering construct. The extensive development of electronic weaponry, mostly referred to as psychotronics, allowed a progressively longer and broader attack range, which no doubt by now includes a complete satellite network. Many psychotronic weapons are patented and viewable on the Surveillance Issues website, just for one. There are many videos and websites on the subject. Also note their quoting of the Patriot Act and how we can all be legally experimented on in the USA by the Department of Defense. It's to make it legal to spy on the public at large, one of the things Edward Snowden tried to blow the whistle about, though he was only scratching the surface. Most wouldn't believe all the technology they have. Here's a very short clip from an interview.
Snowden says he was astonished back then at the access he had at his fingertips, most notably including a computer program that, as he put it, could get inside your thought process.
When I think about an instance that really just struck me as, oh my God, we can do this, and that we can do it to anyone, was that people at NSA, analysts, can actually watch people's internet communications, watch them draft correspondence, and actually watch their thoughts form as they type. As you write a message, you know, an analyst at the NSA or any other service out there that's using this kind of attack against people can actually see you write sentences and then backspace over your mistakes and then change the words and then kind of pause and think about what you wanted to say and then change it. And it's this extraordinary intrusion, not just into your communications, your finished messages, but your actual drafting process, into the way you think.
MKUltra would later develop into other programs as well, likely including COINTELPRO in the FBI and Project Pandora in the CIA, with the latter more directly related to mind control. You can actually see the Pandora reference used in a lot of music, particularly rock music, because the music industry itself is controlled by Illuminati handlers. Music is a subtle method of control, particularly over the teenage demographic after the initial years of media indoctrination, and not just for coercion to consumerism. This is part of the Phoenix plot of Helter Skelter and Order Out of Chaos, which will become more apparent as we go here. Just keep bearing in mind, this is all for an end goal of Satanism. Believe it or don't. Mind control doesn't have to include electronics. It can simply be demagoguing and coercion of public mindsets, the forte of COINTELPRO. This is how most of gang stalking works, casting the victim in a negative light. Many perpetrators of gang stalking are civilians, if Masons or Union lackeys, and not necessarily part of a satanic cult, mafia, or military. In fact, Satanism doesn't enter into it for most of them. It's more of a game, like the surveillance role-playing for Jade Helm exercises. It's not a game, though. It has a very serious end result you can see coming just in the rising police state, where our so-called peacekeepers are being armed to the teeth like a military. I made an entire video playlist about it. Back to MKUltra, it was designed by the Nazi scientists of Germany, Dr. Mengele mainly, who were brought back to the USA with Operation Paperclip after World War II. A lot of the psychology is borrowed from the Tavistock Institute, created for the British military, remember NWO, and in the coincidental year of 1946 when the gray alien hype began. We mentioned Colonel Aquino of the Temple of Set being in the Psychological Warfare Division of the U.S. military. Do you think that's a coincidence here? He was also accused of being part of an on-base pedophile ring at Presidio, likely for reasons of black sex magic rituals, like the Babylon working, where every kid gets to have a new demon friend, a spirit guide. Sacrifices are only part of the picture. It's the energy they use for rituals. Again, this is part of the world satanic plot of worshipping old gods like Lam, beings well known in occult circles for originating outside our universe. Insiders like former FBI head Ted Gunderson were likely killed for exposing this kind of information, mainly cases of satanic ritual abuse, but also people like Bill Cooper. I have to interject about Ted Gunderson, though. Douglas Dietrich, who has some interesting videos about the subject of the military and Satanism, claims Gunderson was in some kind of collusion with Aquino. Strange. Much of the NWO's Luciferian plot is a psyop, though. And this may seem far-fetched, but the largest group of inmates in military prisons is comprised of child sex offenders, roughly 60%, as you can clearly read about here. And I'll try to go slow, which I can't, but pause if you need to read. Then there was the case of American soldiers being told to look the other way from rampant pedophilia at military bases where Afghani Muslim soldiers were being trained, which was finally exposed, but no doubt only hand slaps dispensed for. This isn't only a Freemason or OTO insider cult of American soldiers, Defense Department contractors, or NASA employees who you'd expect to be friends with someone like the late Jack Parsons, or maybe the guy a couple of doors down from Hannibal Lecter, but I've no doubt there's some kind of satanic connection. And lastly on this subject is Project Flicker, revealing that at least 5,200 employees of the DoD, NSA, DARPA, and NRO were involved in a child pornography sting, but the investigation was minimal, largely unheard of, and prosecutions doubtful at least, as most had some link or other to the Pentagon, or the pentagram if you prefer. I will expand more on this point later with the Kay Griggs interview and her exposure of Satanism in government. Make no mistake that it's more than just a few people. I will also link Disney's sex indoctrination to these kinds of pedophile and satanic cults. There's also Satanism in the Mafia, and they're just another brick in the pyramid, to use a Pink Floyd reference. They use mind control too, no doubt mostly for deniable MK assassin personalities, but the modern mafias are highly militarized and no doubt military affiliated. Every evil plays its role in the satanic Masonic NWO plot. Some of the psychotronic devices include microwave, EMF, and ELF weapons. I won't go over every weapon or acronym. It's worth checking these out on my gang stalking playlist. The police have sonic weaponry, like LRADs, designed as a psychotronic weapon in my opinion, though it's claimed to be a non-lethal deterrent weapon for crowd control. Many of these devices can throw voices for one, as if hearing it in your head when on a subsonic or ultrasonic frequency, also known as V2K or voice to skull. This is largely the reason for using these devices in gang stalking or military targeting. The goal is murder, not control in so much, because of the Kabbalistic idea of Klipot, or clawfoot, the mark of the beast, the 66 double V hand sign, and a belief that driving a person to insanity will also send them to the abyss with the fallen angel overlords when the victim dies. This is being done to the public at large, though, and through other means than just psychotronics. It's like an evil Nazi experiment for the Synagogue of Satan, buried within Catholicism as well as antithetical Judaism. As I show more coming up soon, rock music has much to do with pushing this agenda. And I'll also talk more about the peace sign itself, a huge deception, in the next chapter about the false fifth age. It's all relative, but the end goal is to spurn the public toward the abyss using electronics. Other psychotronics are designed to input your brainwaves, interpret your thought patterns, compile them in a computer, and translate into words. Some consider that the real neurophone. They can literally read your mind with electronics now, and it has funneled down from the military into satanic groups like the Black Lodge Masons and even the Blue Lodge Masons and police. A broader and broader control base of Satanists are using this kind of technology to wrest control of the minds of the public, or even create infighting between families, ideologies, and institutions. This is a big part of the spiritual war Jesus was talking about, and the Masonic motto of order out of chaos. It's not all demonic spirits and possession per se. And again, the name Satan means adversary, but he's also known as the accuser, and this seems to be the guiding principle in gang stalking. So if I generically call them Satanists, this is why. Psychotronics seem to be the prime weapon in gang stalking while wearing a target down, and quite a lot of it seems to include Luciferian Masons. No coincidence there. This isn't to say an entire military satellite network isn't fully deployed across the globe, able to pinpoint a victim from out of a crowd, as this DARPA image I like to show implies. Many TIs claim they are attacked with pains in private areas, migraine headaches, and other targeted locations on their bodies. One would have to surmise they can view you inside your home to be able to do that, and that would, at this point, likely include more than just a thermal imaging technology, even surpassing spectral imaging. Didn't want to freak people out before, but if they can use computers to interpret your brain waves and your thoughts, it's not a huge leap to a conclusion to think that what your eyes see, just binocular organs transmitting signals to the brain, they could use a computer to interpret and see through also, much like the movie Being John Malkovich, where the entire movie is from his own point of view. Hope that doesn't disturb some people too much. If it bothers you, try to perform more tasks in the dark and practice blindness. Now there's a form of possession their little lambs taught them, right? Attackers can also manipulate dream states, usually during REM sleep, supplanting false dreams to lure the TI into a train of thought, for whatever purpose, or to dredge up memories, even create false ones. This can be used to program the victim's actions with commands that might be triggered when awake. Many TI stories make these claims, and I'm just extrapolating. As Satanists use these devices against people, they've been known to cause schizophrenic episodes, as these monsters play the voices in people's heads. They may pretend to be God, the devil, aliens, demons, or whatever, in the hope of training and controlling the victim, or TI. It can be shown in media, and I'll throw out various references as we go, but I think the band Metallica captured the phenomenon best with the song Sanitarium. They also have a video where a robot bug crawls out of a kid's ear when he dies, as if to say that's the only way it was coming out. So much music and so many movies reflect this satanic movement, and few are really catching it until now. And you may see quite a lot of sacrilegious imagery, where people like Madonna and Kanye West wear crowns of thorns, for example, no doubt at the behest of their Illuminati handlers. They're the ones eating the biscuit, though. They all get absorbed into the machine, as Pink Floyd puts it, an almost cyborg, hive-minded beast system that's represented best by all the grids and power cords in our lives, which does provide conductivity for negative, even demonic energy that would be too much to go on about here. We're all being slowly plugged into the machine, and the transhumanist agenda can be seen quite plainly in music as well. You can understand why so many Christians are upset about the RFID chips and how that syncs with Bible scripture about the mark of the beast. We would be completely dominated mentally and physically, therefore spiritually, and as a singularity AI or singular cyborg consciousness, we are that much easier to rule over. These musical lackeys of Lucifer's goon squad are helping point your children directly into the maw of hell, and they know it. They make fun with it. It's all part of the pyramid scheme, but that's how celebrities end up in the mind control chain like the rest of us. They're just treated differently. We're all placed in cross-referenced databases by now, demographically niched into neat compartmentalized tables in a spreadsheet. Anytime the Illuminati needs to incite infighting, whether politically or with psychotronics, they just reference a sort of control group for the Hegelian dialectic. They play all nations like chess pieces, or more aptly, like Stratego or Risk, while Satanists at the local level create infighting in people's homes through lesser magic, which is really just hypnosis and babbled nonsense for the most part. They love to see people fight, cause divorces, and all kinds of insanity people wouldn't know was happening. There is chaos being wrought in society up and down the pyramid, and this is classic adversarial Satanism. But also another ideology of theirs is that they are the balance in the world, the yang of the yin, the blind balance of justice, and just plain polar opposite of good. This is a big motivator for them to do these things. Now I'll show you how that sick Mother Naughty Illuminati reference comes into play. Have you ever wondered why Disney just has to cruelly kill those mother figures, or they're just not included in movies at all? Whether it's Bambi, Dumbo, Cinderella, Snow White, or most of the rest, there's a reason behind that mother hate, and it goes along with that sex symbolism people keep pointing out in their movies. As I said before, the Babylon Working was for literally recreating Babylon, and Disney has no small part in this plot. You can see the sex symbolism mostly in the newer movies like The Lion King, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and the others. Beauty and the Beast should be obvious given all I've talked about, but he is in fact a demon of a kind, a manimal. That was for a different psychological focus though. Disney also has a Masonic Club 33 at Disneyland, which is related. Also remember that unholy trinity I mentioned. It has significance here. As an aside, the anagram of Nickelodeon is O's Nick Eon. This is Satan's time, after all, as I'll keep asserting, and he gets about an eon in the Bible. Satan is on about every channel now, thanks to his followers, for total control over the minds of children, and they're being forced into a mold of Satanism and mind control. It's not all about consumerism and corporate behemoths. I may yet make another video describing one of the cartoons they produce, a very cute and harmless programming, aimed at preschoolers with huge Luciferian undertones. It can be proven. This isn't part of the sick mother, but worth noting. The brain is represented as male and female hemispheres, particularly in occult groups, or even a mother and father figure if you like. The brainchild of these two halves, our dichotomous dualistic natures, is the third eye of enlightenment. It is the divine sun figure to them, and they don't want any of us to have ours born, so to speak. They want us all doled down and spiritually limited in a base form of consciousness. I'm not advocating actively trying to do what they do, which is often out-of-body experiences, divination, precognition, and other practices denounced by God in Deuteronomy. But some people do naturally experience these things, and that is a threat to them. You might see through the societal MK programming then. So the female half is also known as the divine feminine or sacred feminine, and is the side they are bashing down the most with Satanism and mind control. Why they're doing this is because you can see that the creative half is what makes you question authority, just for starters. How can you be a good slave to the machine and take orders blindly if you're thinking creatively? It's important to shift more of your consciousness toward the literal left. That's why most video games are just constant left brain attacks or puzzles with little or no real creative input. This is why they created the term MDK, or murder, death, kill. They want that Jerry Springer beast mode turned on high, shifted all the way to the left. Everything in society is shifting to this attitude, which causes a lot of psychological problems on its own due to the imbalance, actually, like an inner conflict. And sex was the main factor in motivating that shift. Believe it or don't. To back this up somewhat, check out these zombie killer bullets you can buy. This is another Illuminati joke, with the joke being us goyim, human cattle, running around shooting each other. They're the vampires, and the rest of us hapless plebes are the zombies they actually feed on. It's where the metaphor in movies is coming from, and why the big zombie rage lately. Why the rage zombies is reflected a bit in the child psychological archetype of the little Nero, the ADD tantrum child who eats little ego-monger's pizza that they're promoting in society with junk food and sugar addictions mostly. Again, holiday sugar rushes. Kids fulfill the rest of the construct when they become teenagers, with music, drugs, and promiscuity mainly. Another part of the zombie metaphor is some psychotronics are designed to keep you in a fuzzy state of mind, confused, and even depressed. Are you depressed? Please take a part in our study. You may see a lot of commercials like that. Back to my point about selling sex as a beast motivator by using the woman in red symbolism the Masons love so much. They've paraded multiple sex symbols in media since the 1950s or so, after the Babylon working. The red woman indirectly and psychologically acts as a representation of the mother figure, even though she's supposed to be a distraction. Without going into details in psychobabble quackery, just take for granted the obvious. However trashy that whore they prop up in front of you is, that's the mother of tomorrow that little girls are emulating now. That's easy enough to understand, right? It started off with Amy Semple McPherson, really, as she was sort of the first media darling and evangelist leading everyone astray. You'll find she has direct Masonic links through her husbands, no coincidence there. But after the Babylon ritual, it started off with Marilyn Monroe. Then Jane Fonda caused a lot of controversy with Barbarella in the 1960s. I'd have to say Farrah Fawcett dominated the 70s, since all guys had the poster, I'm fairly certain. Her marriage to the $6 million man, Lee Majors, had to be one of those arranged Hollywood deals because he is a poster child for the transhumanist agenda as the bionic man. He even fought Bigfoot, an image of the beast, real or not. Then the 80s came along, and Madonna with a very direct bash on the name of the ultimate sacred feminine. From there it just deteriorated to offshoots the Illuminati created, and ended up with obviously MK-controlled girls of Disney and the likes of Lady Gaga. When you see little girls wearing pointy bras, that's your mother of tomorrow. Don't think this wasn't all done on purpose. You can read about the beta kittens of Disney and many thought-provoking articles about mind control in media at vigilantcitizen.com. Many videos are analyzed frame by frame almost. You can see the real effects with the toddlers and tiaras, tantamount to pedophilia. It most likely is for some. It would have to be. Referred to the stories in the military before. They're killing that mother figure all the way down to infancy if they can, and doing it pervertedly the whole way. If they can get grandma to get up and twirl her shirt in the air while dancing on a table, they will all cheer her on. They came up with cougars, MILFs, and no doubt GILFs are on the way unless I missed something. They're a very sick group of possessed freaks, kids. Run from them, kids. Run to Jesus. Run fast, run far. The old gods want to eat you. So do you see now how they make your mother sick and naughty? I told you so. Believe me now, don't you? Musicians are used as tools to help promote this MK agenda toward a beast system, and I couldn't possibly run my mouth long enough to cover all the material that I could prove that fact with. Many other videos are doing a great job of it actually, so look for them, but rock music was initially used as the vehicle to drive us there. Does that really surprise you after all I've said, or what you can see in music today? Everything has been driven to a lurid goth overtone, the hallmarks of Satanism: blood, gore, death, mayhem, and wanton sex with anything that moves, ritual or not. It's driven mainstream society right into their psychological mold. Music moves everyone, and they control all sights and sounds, like the TV show Outer Limits, and it's no coincidence that the theme to that show is all about the Illuminati and MK. As an aside, since I brought up the driving reference, take a look at Stephen King's Christine. The car was haunted by a demon. It was no ghost, but the movie is also about a type of mind control, and you can see that in the kids' transformation throughout the movie. Later they show their disgust for rock and roll, and that is a straight allusion to the musical mind control I'm talking about here. To further the Babylon metaphors, you can see that whore of Babylon being produced in women for the aforementioned reasons, and it's a fighting attitude to go along with. It's not all whoredom. This is part of the beast mode system for the mongrelized humanity I mentioned, creating the female side of slavery unbeknownst to the slaves. It's no coincidence that most female action characters are scantily clad, the warrior princess, which makes sense to wear a two-piece plate mail bikini in medieval combat. It's an archetype being sold to women, and little girls are eating it up as they get sucked into the nerdy world of video games and epic movies, normally only viewed by men. You are made into little Samira Misses and Juniors, no thanks to the transgender, transhumanist agenda of the beast system. For men, it's the image of Nimrod, the mighty hunter. The tattoos and piercings are the marks of a mighty tribal warrior, but also part of ancient Babylonian culture, as it's been in every tribal culture all along. It's war dress. They want all the guys pumped up, full of beast rage, and in the red, base chakra zone. This can even be shown in the rising police state, but I cover that in more detail later. You can see the rise in epic violence in all media, and this appeals to men as much as the barrage of sex-based advertising. The indoctrination is to make the women they parade as whores to be seen as such by men, and Disney has been reinforcing the whole idea since birth for most people. By now that includes Grandma. Disney is no coincidence one of the big 6 media conglomerates, where there used to be many. Since we're on Disney, let's include the pirates and ninjas craze, criminal role models for kids. And I may be reaching with this Disney reference. Captain Jack Sparrow from the Pirates movie might actually be Captain Jack's Pharaoh, as an Egyptian emperor and child of the gods, a Nephilim. Just extrapolating a bit, and I won't get into Johnny Depp and his associations with Satanism. Again, it's a total social construct. You've been eating up their Masonic garbage meals, TV indoctrination, and other psychological abuse since the day you were born, even most Masons. That's the sick irony of it all. They're just as affected by a lot of what they offer the rest of us through the system. Only the elite are really safe from this indoctrination. Most Masons probably only know the basics to look out for, and they're selling us all out to people who worship Lucifer. You can see the Babylonian hypnosis witchcraft at work in music mainly, particularly where Helter Skelter is used by the Beatles, Marilyn Manson, Aerosmith, and many others who cover the song. Again, witch language is from Babylon originally, but since God sent the world off babbling, if you read the Bible, the language is now full of alliterations like hocus pocus, mumbo jumbo, abracadabra, etc. Helter Skelter is about shaking up society, but also killing your parents, basically. You can see how that relates to Charles Manson if you're familiar. It was a big deal in the 1960s when this form of psychological warfare was becoming more pervasive. You can see how Marilyn Manson's alter persona was created for music and Helter Skelter witchery just by his stage name alone. Marilyn is that first woman in red to gawk at and be distracted by, aside from the psychological bash I mentioned. But obviously Charles Manson for his Helter Skelter shaking up of society from its foundations, the youth of the next generation, and murder. It's not that they assumed kids would run out and kill their parents, even if constantly hypnotized with the phrase. It's that it would start off with tension, then build to hate possibly, and if your life was bad enough, you might get drastic. It was all to cause chaos and rebellion in the 60s, and you can see how that worked out, though many will claim it's all just a reflection of Vietnam or even the civil rights movements of Martin Luther King Jr. and Native Americans seeking their land rights back. Not so. Vietnam was mostly about drug running from Cambodia and Laos, though probably some Babylonian quest pieces also. And the satanic establishment of the eyeball didn't want anyone looking at that war any harder than people already were. Most of these ploys are a bait and switch, and sometimes just a test to see how we can all be manipulated. The Iraq War was about the same. To make another point, the 1960s were just about the end of useful sit-ins and civil rights movements. Most parades and protests, even with a permit, unless LGBTQ, part of the construct in my opinion, will get you quickly LRATed back to your home or probably even arrested. Resistance to oppression is mostly silenced these days, especially in the free U.S. of America. And back to the unholy trinity and sick mother for a minute. The sacrifice of a family member, particularly a sacred feminine, can be shown as a pattern that you can research yourself. Certain celebrities have already been noted as moving up the Illuminati pyramid to the next highest income bracket by murdering or having them murdered. This stuff really goes on, kids. Your favorite idol is most likely a devil worshiper who sacrifices their own family just to get ahead. What do you think they do with you? And make no mistake, the whole idea of idol worship is what's being presented to you on purpose, not just to shift your focus away from God and Christ, the eternal enemies of the synagogue running entertainment, but to unwittingly bring you into Satanism. This is being forced on society in many ways, not just with devil music or TV shows like Lucifer. It's part of the social construct. It's to rule us as slaves in their twisted version of hell. A part of this is in making demons harmless by calling them spirit guides. Mirandejo said he had them, and note the swords with no blood, like a so-called magician. While I would have said his guides were MK-Ultra handlers, and could still have been, it's far more likely he was being possessed by a demon. That's exactly the kind of thing that's consistent with real possession, kids. Invulnerability. Believe it or don't. I have some other material exposing demon-worshipping magicians, but also note that most magicians wear a death charm because they want to avoid death and being owned by the demon they made the contract with. Magician Mike Super says he has a spirit named Desmond that helps him. Demon if you drop the S and D at the end. There are others making the same claim he is. There are many musicians who also claim spirit guides. Beyonce has Sasha Fierce. Little Nicki Minaj has Roman the Bully. But here's just a short list of famous people all claiming their inspiration or being outright infused with spirit guides. Here we go. Robin Williams, Shirley MacLaine, Johnny Depp, Denzel Washington, Oprah, Keanu Reeves, Marilyn Monroe, Mae West, Peter Sellers, James Dean, and get this, Michael Landon, who mainly wrote so-called wholesome family shows like Little House on the Prairie with the help of spirits. His spirits aided him with automatic writing of scripts, something only done in occult practices, really. And that's not how the Bible was written anyway. These people's spirits are phony and are demons, however innocently anyone takes a spirit guide or New Age philosophy to be. And not to be left out, Ramtha, Ramtha as in goat, Azazel's favorite sacrifice, makes her money by fooling people out of theirs in her seminars of channeling. Aside from being a practice denounced by God, hers is a demon if it's a real spirit guide. That's how it goes in the real world of Satanism, kids. It's just a bonus. He's a 5,000-year-old Atlantean like the kind I mentioned before. Coincidence? I'll talk about her more later in other material. Again, while I might claim a form of MK-Ultra hypnotic possession, those people are known for being into the occult and fringe beliefs anyway. It was all by choice. New Age spiritualism was a big push during the 20th century anyway, mostly promoted by people like Aleister Crowley, and was only ever meant to remove us all from Christ and God. The electronics were really just an add-on to the whole deception. What the goal of these particular spirits is to entertain you. The detainment of your brain, as a preacher I can't remember the name of put it, sorry. They are amusing you. Amusement means to not think, and that's all it comes down to, distraction and deception. That's why they need to dance and do magic tricks for you like the ones in Egypt that Moses met. It's a big show covering their escape plan. And just a couple of old hints they were trying to throw at the kids around the time Madonna's first album came out. Here's Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast. It's meant the way it sounds, but has Illuminati undercurrent written all over it anyway. Then there's Judas Priest with the Hellion, Electric Eye, and you should look up the lyrics for that. But there's also Alan Parsons' Eye in the Sky. It speaks volumes about the psychotronics, aside from the giant eyeball on the front cover, which could just be a reference to fallen old gods. They can read your mind, but with electronics, it just doesn't say how. Judas Priest kind of does, though. You can find so many links in music if you just look, and most of it is about Satanism, which is just indirectly referring to mind control. These just show how far back you can look and make connections for yourself. That mostly covers what you need to know about the mind control going on in society, that it's electronic control, psychotronics, but also mainly used by Satanists who generally use hypnosis as a form of lesser Babylonian magic. Whatever they tell you about Egypt, it came from Babylon, and before that even, possibly the so-called Atlantis, when giant Nephilim built all those temples and pyramids I talked about. Again, Satan and demons trying to escape and possessing people. I can't overstate that part of the spiritual war enough, and it's also part of the gang-stalking holocaust. It's not just doomsaying. These people have had death in mind all along, just not for themselves. And if you look at things like Jade Helman FEMA camps, then you can see why you might take worrying more seriously. A confused society will cry for leadership of any kind. Most things are only now coming to light, which it basically states in the Bible also, coincidentally. All will be revealed at the end. If I had to sum it all up, why the devil, or Lucifer, does these things is because if you knew you would be cast into a fireplace one day, the lake of fire, then you'd want to take as many of an inferior species with you as possible. Why it said Satan tests us is because we were always considered inferior, and exactly why he wants to take us all to hell with him. It's to prevent you from ever being an angel of God. Even Yahweh said he was sorry he made mankind right before the flood, and we are a sorry species for the most part. Believe it or don't. BS. The fifth age is defined as, from that transmigration down to the advent of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is the age of Aquarius, spoken of mostly since the 1960s, when it was fashionable to be a rebellious hippie. But again, all this is part of the social construct to shift society toward a common goal of Satanism, the Dragon Age. The Aquarian Age of peace is an illusion. The Freemasons mainly really mean the Phoenix rising, hell and Satan, or Lucifer, reborn on earth, coming up from the abyss. This is very reflective of the Masonic adage of Ordo ab Chao, or order out of chaos, with the Phoenix, or dragon, rising from the ashes. Again, this chaos has much to do with the idea of sending the world into the abyss and spurning us to insanity the whole way. I already showed a montage of marks of the beast in the Sacrifices chapter, and how the Catholic Church was involved as the hidden city of false prophecy, along with the Pope being the Antichrist. No doubt all part of the synagogue of Satan. This is where the House of Rothschild, the Bavarian Illuminati, and the Church all link together in the New World Order. A new world many believe is a merging of the astral plane with the material universe. You'll also notice in this image it speaks of the Rothschilds representing Mars, a war god, which can be equated with the war god Nodens, associated with the mark of the beast. Coincidence? Nodens is the god of the abyss to Kabbalists. Killing Jesus in this world, destroying Christianity itself, is not unlike killing Horus or any other representation of a deity of light depicted in so many false religions. All these beliefs can be reduced to one idea, though: the removal of God in favor of the devil, to simplify, and why I keep emphasizing to give your heart and mind to the Messiah, Jesus Christ, in all my material, because he's the only one who will help you in this spiritual war. You won't be saved by a secret order. Ideologies promulgated in their orders are being placed squarely in the heads of you and your children through all forms of media, even social media, created as yet another distraction, among other reasons. And you can clearly see the chaos rising not just in society, but in signs of global weather, waters turning to blood in places, and other strange phenomena. It's not just Project Bluebeam or a HARP or DARPA ploy to deceive you, though some may be. Research and view it for yourself to make your own distinctions. The Masons and lackeys of the NWO are selling you junk food to dumb you down, and worse if you watch more of my material, but the entire idea is for control of society. There's a reason some fast food chains are represented by clowns. The clowns are us for eating their food. It's an inside joke. And since they only want 500 million people on Earth, as shown on the Georgia Guidestones, less really, they've implemented several means of population control besides war. Monsanto's cornering of the world's seed market is giving the world cancer, for instance. I'll speak more about this and other topics in subsequent videos. One thing that brought us into the new Babylon, as they've been capping off their pyramid, was the system of government created in the USA. More than a few presidents and celebrities are related by blood, even if eighth or so cousins, usually. They created a system where they win no matter who becomes president. The Masonic pillar system conveniently forms a pyramid as the two pillars lean on one another, and most candidates are Illuminati shills, even if not a relation. It's why only Republicans or Democrats ever win. All the NWO players mainly work through Freemasonry, but again includes the Catholic Church, mostly meaning Italians and Germans, and the phony Jews of the Synagogue of Satan that Jesus mentioned. The Temple of Set and Church of Satan are just game pieces, yet they're all Satanists of one kind or another. The Illuminati is known as the hidden hammer to some, or hidden hand, and why they put it on the communist banner of the USSR after collapsing the Tsarist ruling family. This Pink Floyd image reflects them best with the song Waiting for the Worms. It's an intentionally evil song that captures them perfectly, and why I keep using them as a reference. Their flying pig is also a joke on us. All these people together, the elite families, the Satanists of all kinds, have been ruling us as slaves with all their garbage for a very long time. They own all the currencies, and it's a vacuous economy waiting to implode. They want World War III, nuclear or not, and a societal collapse that allows them to take over, hence the building up of facilities like Jade Helm, FEMA camps, and arming the police like military personnel. Most police are ex-military anyway. You can also see that false fifth age being formed in corporate media and logos. We'll look at a couple of images here just to show they own everything and love putting a sun, goddess, or NWO symbol on them in good old Nimrod fashion, Lucifer really, or maybe Semiramis fashion since they're hottest for the goddess, the whore of Babylon. Saturn is another name for Satan, for example. Drive the new Satan damnation. Contracts and rebates may not apply. The big car manufacturers are German and Italian mainly, with few other elite competitors, and not for having any less brilliant of engineers anywhere else. It's a question of wealth and power in old world families, but the USA may play the prime role in the New World Order, as our country has been a puppet of these old world satanic brotherhoods, mostly since its revolution and inception. They funded the military-industrial complex mainly through drug running, mostly after the Babylon era in World War II. McCarthyism came along almost as soon as the Cold War began, another Illuminati distraction by creating paranoia and fear that ruined as many lives as these satanic spies in the U.S. military do every day, and most of these drug wars now have children in the firing line. The terrorists you were trained to fear with false flag events like 9/11 end up being under 18 most of the time, just like the missing kids in the USA I mentioned. War has become a push-button exercise to kill civilians who are in the way of phantom enemies, and often just to grab up occult artifacts. Most people wouldn't be surprised to learn at this point that the war in Vietnam was mostly about drug running out of Laos and Cambodia, as I said. The Iran-Contra scandal showed how South America became the next target after the U.S. left the Asian theater. By now they have everyone hooked on cocaine, heroin, and/or opiates in general through their doctors, bolstering Illuminati income from pharmaceutical interests. They don't care what you do. Live, die, get cancer, plow into a concrete wall with your new Satan damnation. To them it's all good or evil or something. I really don't think they know. Many people will want to look out for this in their Illuminati hunts, if you weren't already aware. The display of the cross is a well-known blasphemy to Satanists, as it's an image of Jesus in just the state they love to see him in, for one. You wouldn't want to see everyone wearing a little gun around their neck if your father was shot to death, would you, even if well-meaning? They do mean it as a joke, as you'll notice many celebrities wear them, and they're not religious in the regard you'd figure. This is best revealed by the joke placed above Jesus on the cross, INRI, which should clue you in on where the ancient Brotherhood of the Snake took its turn toward the synagogue of Satan that would rule through a church, and also Freemasonry after a time. The synagogue is evil Jews, so they made fun of him by saying King of the Jews over his head. It's all the same people who did this to Jesus in a sense to begin with. They also brought you the peace sign, though that might be more rightly attributed to the Nazi fascists. The sign started out as a Teutonic death rune, and why the Nazis used the opposite version on their insignias, but is also popularized as blasphemy in satanic initiation rites. The initiate is told to break a cross upside down to renounce Christ completely, and one reason they found it amusing to bring it up as a mock peace sign in the 1960s. Many people wear them now and have no idea. I thought this important to add. In other material, I'll detail more of the origin of the name of America and the serpent, the police state, CERN, Satanism, Synagogue of Satan, and you should really check out my take on the Nazi Denver airport. I have a surprise interpretation there. I already mentioned the most important revelation of the Catholic Church being the Whore of Babylon, so it ruins my entire routine of the harbor, torch, and whore that is the statue of so-called Liberty, or Columbia, the Illuminati whore goddess. I do have to concede to Scripture, though, and Nainania's analysis. And honestly, I would have already called the Pope the Antichrist just for his role as vicar in place of Christ, as I said, but that's a big boundary to overstep. So in a way, I was already half correct. I just like calling America the whore, and I can back that up with the pornography, and the child pornography at that, as I mentioned, that is so very much more prevalent in this country than any other. Debaucherous doesn't begin to cover it. It's black sex magic of the Illuminati, OTO, Temple of Set, etc., to dredge up their sick little lambs. But the Statue of Liberty is based on the Whore of Babylon. Italian and Semiramis origins or not, look that up. So I'll just say it anyway because it feels good. Harbor, torch, whore, and she wants all your masses upon her because she's the slut of the world. There, I said it. I have my own reasons for hating the Masonic Mafia, but it's really the synagogue of Satan this all comes down to, and that's really who represents the great Byzantineless eyeball to us all.
It removes redness and as an ingredient to moisturize. The difference is clear. Clear eyes.
A strange coincidence that Rob Skiba brought up was that another Hebrew translation of Yeshua, another name for Jesus, is the hand that destroys the establishment of the eye. That's strange. Take that as you will. Believe it or don't. As I'll point out again later, the USA was mostly founded on genocide of indigenous people with the vacuous slogan of Manifest Destiny. The synagogue set that up, I'm sure, just as they had a huge hand in the murder of Jewish people in Nazi Germany. It wasn't all Germans, Masons, or the U.S. military doing these things. It was many NWO families and part of the Illuminati playbook. These things have all been a part of an ongoing MK social construct. They just keep refining it over time. Masking demons as aliens goes as far back as H.G. Wells' time, even before in 1800s parlor spiritualism, like a novelty. But these days it's just plain aliens. And I had a routine about a holy quad of lie detection you can use on musicians and others, especially the Seattle grunge band circuit. Why do you think they chose such dirty drug whores to be role models for your children to begin with, grungy?
That's what the Christians say. Citizens. God, why was there Auschwitz? Well?
Satan, Satan, Satan. Satan, Satan.
And most particularly from one area of the world where the formal constitution of the Rosicrucian Fellowship was signed, just for starters. They're just as much a part of this as anyone else, but the musical side of things is again best explained in my MK Ritual Satanic Murders video. It says it all, and again, rock music is the helter-skelter vehicle to drive it. But you can still go up to people with voice inflection devices, body language experts, and thermal imagers to ask if they've drank any baby's blood lately, ate any $1,000 plates of baby body parts, or even eaten their own feces. They keep musicians strung out on heroin and whatnot because they're just tools. And just to note, I've personally never taken anything like heroin, cocaine, or other hard addictive drug unless it was a prescription, and even then I don't take cold medicine usually. I've been demagogue to the contrary myself in the gang stalking networks that include animals like these. Many others have also. My own gang stalking is partly because I can out people, and am doing so now because people are finally ready to accept that Satan runs their world. People are actually starting to wake up. The point of this video wasn't just to educate you, yank your matrix cords out or anything. I am saying you need to consider what these worms will do to your kids' heads, and might do if they create a reason to enforce death camps on the populace. Look how quickly the American Japanese were rounded up in World War II, practically overnight. That could be you, so don't wait for the worms. These people worship the goat demons like Baphomet, Pan, Seder, Krampuses, Samael, Sam I Am, or even Azazel, who gave men weapons in war if you read Enoch. Thus the goat references in the pentagram in Satanism. This is why it says in the Bible that Jesus places the goats on his left and his faithful sheep on the right, just before sending the goats off to the lake of fire, an oven for witches. So you have a decision to make. Are you a little goat of Babylon, poor pebbles, or are you a sheep in the right? They're kind of the exact reason Yahweh said he was sorry he'd even made mankind to begin with before the flood. We hit a fevered pitch of evil back then, and we're just about at the same point again now. They'll be living in a very real bad dream at the end of one of their favorite goat's pitchforks for a very long time. Believe it or weep. I'll paraphrase Arthur C. Clarke here, Illuminati shill that he probably was. Any technology advanced enough would seem like magic, and so will the lake of fire. It's why I keep saying to run to Jesus in my material, because when the prophecies are all fulfilled and everything comes to a head, people who ask why God never does anything about evil will finally have their question answered for them. Believe it or don't.
You over here! Run! Run!
The plot thickens. This is just a rough analysis of the supposed Revelation 12 event that will happen in September 2017, though in actuality a part happens from January through September. The retrograde, or gestation of Jupiter in the womb of the Virgin, Virgo, even though Jupiter doesn't technically sit right in her midsection. That might be the most significant part of why people believe this represents Revelation 12 anyway. The metaphorical gestation of Jupiter, though this event never happens again with these particular planetary and stellar alignments, that's another part of the reason. I also need to mention that Elohim, as the correct translation goes, made it very clear that constellations were only for signs and seasons. He, I won't argue the plurality here, didn't give the constellations names, though some groups of stars, like the Pleiades, do seem to be noted in certain scriptures. The astrologers of the mystery schools did the naming, probably in the antediluvian world, well before Nimrod, and these names are mostly of a Greek and Roman legacy. They did borrow from Babylon, Egypt, and other occult religions as well, and we could even infer some Nordic and Viking influence. There's a reason the Bavarian Illuminati, OTO, and even the Nazis seem to be so influential in what we now know as the New World Order. Anyway, here's the verse from Genesis, right from the beginning. Genesis 1:14, and Elohim said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. I don't see anything about Orion, Virgo, or giant snakes in there. Seems for timekeeping to me, but I digress. Virgo is in actuality representative of the Gnostic mother goddess figure. We know by the many names I've listed time and again, so we'll just go with Virgo here. But she also represents the Black Madonna. I mean, how else is she going to give birth to a divine son, a so-called planet with a single Illuminati eyeball, no less, who just happens to be the father of none other than Apollyon the Destroyer, who's scheduled to come up from the bottomless pit soon. Jupiter's son is Apollo, after all. Let's be realistic about this and to give the alternative view of things, as I try to anyway. Yehovah also created evil. Isaiah 45:7. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. He's no puppeteer, and we all have free will, even fallen angels, but if he chooses to allow or make use of these events for the greater good, then I'm not discounting there's a relation to it with the prophecy of Revelation 12. Whether that's happening here is debatable, but it sure does look like it in just about every way, short of a few points I'll make. It also seems to fall apart after a few verses. Anyway, Revelation 12:1, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. While the sun tends to sit over her shoulder in the stellarium software I'm using, it may, in the form of a vision, have been blinding and appeared that way. I won't try to argue it. The moon does sit very near her feet. There's no denying that. But what's very coincidental for this verse is the fact that Leo, a king presumably being the crown, has only 9 stars, yet during this time is joined by 3 so-called planets. I'm using a biblical flat earth viewpoint of a firmament and luminaries here. Mercury, Mars, and Venus, all names of pagan gods. Venus is a little ironic if you caught my linking of her with Lucifer in the pentagram before, and you can see that even Saturn, Satan, makes an appearance at the opposite end near the serpent, but we'll get to that. Revelation 12:2, and she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pained to be delivered. Again, Jupiter is in a gestational period of retrograde for 9 months leading up to this. This doesn't all happen right on September 23rd. There is a series of holy days and appointed times of Yehovah happening from September 20th through the 30th, 10 days. I'll run the time lapse and we can observe the entire time period here from roughly sundown. Notice I didn't say sunset, the Egyptian fallen angel, on the 20th through the 30th. The 20th is actually the 29th of the Hebrew month of Elul, and a new moon on the last day of the year 5777. It's also Erev Rosh Hashanah, meaning the day before the actual celebrated holy day. The next day is the first of Tishrei, 5778, Rosh Hashanah, the New Year Feast of Trumpets. The 29th and 30th are Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and the days in between that and the Feast of Trumpets are known as the Days of Awe. Yamim Noraim, also known as the Days of Repentance. People were flipping out in 2015 because September 23rd was the Day of Atonement, but you can see it's in the middle of the Days of Repentance this time. And why 23 is significant is numerological. I don't care to labor this point, but bad things happen with 23 in occult circles, so it gets all the press in the time period. It's 10 more than 13, to me anyway. So Virgo is giving birth to Jupiter here, travailing in birth, even though it doesn't appear close enough to her womb. We have to admit the planets aligned in Leo is too coincidental to dismiss, and this entire alignment and birth apparently never happens again. Not before the end of the Bible happens anyway. Revelation 12:3, and there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. Okay, we're already hitting a snag here. I will grant that John was having a vision, sans little people drawn in the sky for him like we're seeing here, so he could have been interpreting serpens as the red dragon. The constellation Draco is nowhere near Virgo, facing opposite actually, and would make a better candidate otherwise, though Hydra is also near her and would be more apt to have several heads given the lore of the Hydra. But Serpens is right there waiting to jump whoever comes along. Right above him is the Corona Borealis, a crown with exactly 7 stars. Serpens also has 7 stars, at least on this side of the serpent charmer, Ophiuchus. Those could be the 7 heads, 7 stars. Ophiuchus is considered the 13th sign of the zodiac, as an aside. I can't account for the 10 horns in this, and it's one of the many reasons people feel this is more a parable for a real-world organization like the UN. It works for the beast coming up from the sea, as the UN with its 10 regions on 7 continents. Also the 10 regions of the Club of Rome, but it says that beast comes from the sea. For believers in the waters above the firmament, perhaps this is the ocean John is really talking about. The other comes from the earth, the bottomless pit, which makes sense if Jupiter comes from above and releases his son of destruction, Apollo, from below. As above, so below. And I think it goes without saying that Jupiter Zeus, Jesus, the false Christ, is not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's certainly not our salvation. While most of this alignment seems to fit Revelation 12, we still can't account for the dragon's 10 horns from this image or any local stars. At least I can't. Moving on. Revelation 12:4, and his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Clearly, Serpens is just waiting to strike, given the angle, but who's to say what this really means? People talk about wormwood, Nibiru, and even Draconid meteor showers to end us all. I think if this is really biblical, it might have more to do with the luminaries mentioned by Enoch, and where angels are called stars in the Bible. If you're a flat earther, what you see is definitely not what you get, and you know it will get played down as some kind of alien invasion or first contact with false disclosure. That's what most of us are waiting for. This part is cryptic, and I'm sure some have answers they'll claim, but until we see it, it's anyone's guess. Revelation 12:5, and she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. Here's a conundrum. Jupiter rules with an iron rod. I already showed how he's a false Jesus, and if you caught my last video, I talked about Chi Rho being the first two letters of Christos, and another ploy for the false Christ who will be presented to us. He will literally call himself Jesus Christ. Those names shouldn't even be used. The real Messiah's name is Yeshua, as it was shortened to after the second temple was built, or so the story goes. The point here is that the last time Jupiter was put on a throne, it was as Zeus by Antiochus Epiphanes IV in 167 BC. History tends to repeat itself, and the Bible is a parable for the end times from start to finish practically. The really important thing to note here is Virgo is the Black Madonna, the Black Virgin, just as Semiramis, Isis, or any number of mother goddess figures were, are, and always give birth to the husband sun, like a phoenix being reborn from the ashes. It's staple for sun worship and Gnosticism to center on this unholy trinity and create a divine sun child through an Oedipal relationship with a mother wife, just as with Nimrod. This is a parable for the rising of the Antichrist, which is an ironic term, really. But who is the father? It's not really stated here. Well, according to legend, Saturn, or Cronus to the Greeks, is the father of Jupiter. Saturn is also called Satan to most, and there's an entire occult backstory about the early Earth being lit in a purple haze by the black sun of Saturn. That's not in the Bible, but I think it's safe to say here that the child being born is the son of Satan. He's down there hanging off of Ophiuchus's leg, the 13th sign of the zodiac, watching all this unfold, or maybe he's the serpent waiting to strike. Revelation 12:6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. There are various interpretations of what the times and half a time, the 1,260 days or years, the 3.5 years or 42 months prophesied by Daniel and John actually mean. Clearly, Revelation is based on earlier visions of prophets, and I'm not going to argue any of that. Most feel that the woman represents the elect, the body of Christ, and the true Israelites who will be raptured, and even the two witnesses in most interpretations, and taken to safety during the tribulation. There are many arguments for and against the rapture, and I'm not going to argue those either. What I do want to mention is the lesser-known fact of Revelation barely making it into the Bible by one vote and a bishop named Athanasius. Some even feel it was tampered with by the Catholic Church. There are many who still feel it shouldn't even be included, and that John, who was exiled to the Greek island of Patmos, is not at all the same person as Apostle John. Before I talk about any of that, I think most of us are pretty well resigned to these being the end times that we're living in. Just watching end times news compilations should be pretty solid indicators of that. So I'm not arguing against any of it. This is a point worth noting, though. I'm trying to be brief, which won't happen, I'm sure. So I'll leave some links in the description and you can decide for yourself, but there are some very compelling arguments to be made about Revelation. I know some will say God wouldn't allow it to be there if it wasn't gospel, but just for starters, you can read Job to understand that God allows a lot to happen to us all. Also mentioned, we'd all be under a strong delusion, and even that things like Luciferians are allowed to run this planet with the fallen angels and even child sacrifice. It's just my own opinion. Books like Enoch's were omitted for being too apocalyptic, or not to the Catholic Church's liking. And be honest, that's who put the Bible together for us, any version. And of all the books that reflect Revelation, the Book of Enoch, at least Book 1, is probably the closest. I think all angles should be looked at myself, so I'm not so much arguing against Revelation here as making a point and being fair with alternate viewpoints. This isn't just about faith, this is about truth. Again, a strong delusion. It's even been said that the strong delusion might actually be referencing Strong's Concordance. I won't get into how many people adamantly claim the Mandela effect changed the Lord's Prayer from trespasses to debts, or how quantum computing and things like CERN can actually change reality. I've talked about that before, but to think we can't be played for fools or given a test of resolve like Job is limiting truth. Just being blunt here. There are many reasons to say the upcoming stellar alignment in 2017 does directly relate to the end times as a sign, as much as we can say it has nothing to do with the book of Revelation itself. That's the psyop I guess I was getting at, but I'm pressed for time these days and my research is being held back a little, I admit that. But to briefly sum up the main arguments for why some feel Revelation is heresy, I'll just make these quick points. For one, John of Patmos counters much of what comes in several books and prophecies before his. He implies that being taken up to heaven is based on good works, as opposed to Jesus' promises through the gospel itself. Revelation 20:12. See where it says the dead are judged according to their works. I know my material seems half-baked and all op-ed sometimes, but I'm not pulling your legs here. This is not the message given by Jesus in several books preceding. It's something to consider seriously. Some even consider it to be a reflection of Emperor Nero and John's own tribulation with Rome. And if I'm not mistaken, Revelation is the only book referencing Jesus directly as the morning star, a metaphor only made about Lucifer in other scriptures. To be fair here though, all the angels are called morning stars in Job 38:7. Angels are randomly referred to as stars in general, which I pointed out before along with the orb UFOs, but it's a dangerous allegory that puts Jesus and Lucifer in the same light, so to speak. Venus is also called the morning star, thus references to Lucifer and even Virgo, whose constellation this whole topic is about and has a lot in common with Venus. We could even bring up Sirius as the morning star, as it's been called that, and that star has been about goddess worship since Inanna, Isis, etc. It's not a good mold to try to fit Jesus into, is my point. If you read the entire page at the link I'll leave for these arguments, you'll see in some opinions Revelation is like a final test to see how well you know previous scriptures and how vastly different they really are from one another, mainly Jesus' own words. Again, it's clear so many of us want Yeshua to return and clean this mess up, yes, to use his proper name, and send the child-raping pizza lovers into the abyss and more. But when talking about the woman Virgo in the upcoming stellar alignment, it does not necessarily have to reflect the book of Revelation itself. That's all I'm saying. And just to note a couple of other fine points, there isn't even a third temple built yet, which was already established by prophecies well before Revelation, namely Ezekiel 40. The Sanhedrin want Trump and Putin to start rebuilding, hence why some think Trump might be the new Cyrus, but it's also possible to set up a tent version of the Holy of Holies and fulfill prophecies well before the stellar alignment happens. Just saying. They would pretty much have to. The Antichrist is also supposed to make an appearance. This is another point I've learned more about that I may make another video for, maybe not. My point is, the powers that be, who clearly want to play God and make these things happen, will have to coordinate a lot of events to fulfill all the prophecies in time. The 7 seals, bowls, and trumpets of Revelation are clearly one series of events told in different ways, at least in many educated opinions, though asynchronously leading up to the 7th, where all series of events converge with the return of Yeshua, our Messiah. It's just not easy to put the story of the woman, Virgo, into the timeline of Revelation, as John puts no fine point on it. But something interesting to note that he may have been given knowledge of, as well as other Bible authors, was not only that this stellar alignment would happen in the future, but that it happened before. The Pyramid of Giza is considered a giant astronomically aligned clock. I'll leave some links again for these ideas, but the passageways share what is thought to be the Christ triangle. It speaks of a period of 7,000 years, or 7 years of 1,000 years each, and the birth and return of the Messiah. Does that sound familiar in Bible terms? And on a side note of the upcoming alignment, there are many who consider the star Regulus in Leo to be the star of the Messiah and Bethlehem at Jesus' birth. Jupiter is the king planet, and all this was seen before in Bethlehem when our Messiah was born into the world. This is why so many are seeing this event as a metaphor for the return of Yeshua. Old habits die hard. I keep going back and forth. Sorry about that. There is some contention about the exact date of Yeshua's birth. Some say 911-3 BC, while others target late September and 2 BC, adjusting for a lack of year 0. The pyramid clock even notes the death of the Messiah in 33 AD. In any case, the pyramid is seen as a time marker for astronomical events as well as literal. It's also a prophecy clock. Clearly, all these signs in the heavens existed long before Egyptians, Israelites, or any other predecessors came along, so names are kind of meaningless. But it is very clear these alignments have happened before, and more specifically at the time of Yeshua's birth. It's just a question of whether Revelation is truly God's word and not taking things out of context. Again, it's all just food for thought, and I'm not trying to dissuade anyone of their beliefs. I've been studying Revelation just like the rest, hoping for Yeshua to return, and there are other options to consider while under a strong delusion of occult orders that God, Yahweh, Yahuwah, or whatever name you prefer for the Most High, God equals good, obviously allows to happen. It's hard to be brief about this, but Egypt was just as much under the influence of fallen angels as Masons are now, specifically Lucifer. They knew and know a lot, obviously, sadly more than most when it comes to these things, but as I already said, this alignment falls apart when comparing it to Scripture. Again, some see the woman as the elect being taken to safety when she flees into the wilderness, and the signs in the heavens are really only a warning or metaphor for things yet to come. Her child being snatched up to God and his throne is clearly an allusion to Yeshua, Jesus if you prefer, but obviously not the Antichrist or false Messiah. I think most would agree with this much at least, but as a sign in the heavens, it can't be taken literally, or Virgo and all the stars would have to disappear or fall out of the sky. My point here is the rest happens in a literal sense with the sun, moon, and stars when people are analyzing this event, but then trail off with allegories and metaphors that leave it unresolved. I'm just taking the entirety of it as a sign and added to the many signs I've been seeing lately myself. I might yet make a video about that too, we'll see. I'm going to leave the rest of Revelation alone from this point. I think you can see where I was going with the point of this video now, but I want to get back to Revelation 12:4 and address a part where I was too brief and add some new info that I found for Nibiru. These images here are fairly well known, hidden by Google Sky and others, and many are under the impression that NASA and other agencies are using technology to hide our impending doom from us using their patented sun generator, Project Bluebeam, fire sign, or something similar. This could be a reference to the dragon throwing his stars to the earth, and there really is some compelling evidence of our sky having two suns as well as holographic moons and more if we're not just being toyed with by NASA and the occult elite. I just had to add this because there are many expecting a cataclysmic event involving Nibiru or Planet X, and I won't discount that possibility. The rest of the signs are lining up, so why not? And for those who will still say Jesus was a fable or story for controlling the masses, I just have to throw this in. There are more than a few tales by many Native American tribes of one who looked, acted, and spoke just exactly as Jesus did, walking amongst and teaching them. So this isn't all resigned to the Middle East and lore of the ancients. As I once said of Exodus and other Bible scripture, these things happened. Believe it or don't. I won't go into the details about Native Americans possibly being a lost tribe or what Yeshua did while amongst them, maybe in another video, but I'll leave a link and you can check that out too if interested. I do have to make one last side note relevant to this topic, particularly if Nibiru turns out to be real. I've been on the fence with that and Flat Earth for quite a while, but they both present some strong arguments if you look into them. But I, like some others, don't feel that being taken up to God involves a rapture while alive. Yes, I said that. I have to admit that my inclination, even when not being a studied Christian or a very good one, was that we would all need to die to go meet Jesus, whom I now refer to more respectfully as Yeshua, obviously. I know many will not agree with that, but just consider this. What does a first resurrection mean? What do you need to be resurrected for if you don't die as he did? Do you feel you'll be instantly transformed with a new body from your old? I'm not trying to burst anyone's bubble, but if you really believe in these things, you should know that Revelation also talks about people suffering and dying as he did. Just food for thought. No fear. You shouldn't need to fear anything, even death or losing loved ones, if you have faith in the Lord. That's also what it says. When Yeshua is called the Alpha and Omega, as well as Yahuwah or Yahweh, whatever you like, being I am, it refers to a quantum cycle we can't fathom. A new heaven and earth are promised, and it's reflected in many doomsday and recreation legends worldwide. Maybe that phoenix rising from the ashes has less to do with a new world order and Dragon's fifth age than Masons were hoping for. The one true living God promised to never flood the world again, but he didn't say he wouldn't bathe the earth in fire to cleanse and renew it. Whatever you choose to believe, Revelation, Nibiru, or Hopi Indian prophecies, these are definitely the end times. And when I said to run to Jesus in my first videos, I wasn't kidding. We're on borrowed time. So even if you don't believe Revelation was inspired scripture or that it was the Apostle John who wrote it, he was still clearly onto something. Believe it or don't. I already showed the purple, green, and gold color scheme used with certain characters and even certain pizza arcades. Pizza. Particularly with Mardi Gras and how the king cake is suspiciously pedophiliac with the baby that's supposed to be a hidden surprise. So check out my Mardi Gras video if you've not seen it. I interjected this preschool workbook at the last minute before, and it needs to be noted what the pedophilia code words are, for those not familiar. Read fast because I'm not going to read them all, but you can also see how my redefinition of the MAP code word is a little different. It's just convenient they're changing the term pedophile to minor attracted person with the same acronym, MAP. This is how pervasive the perversion is, and most parents would never have a clue what any of it meant. I figure almost everyone is familiar with all that, so I won't linger here. What I'm sure many aren't that familiar with, though, is how something as seemingly innocent as Willy Wonka has actual pedophilia references, at least one buried in it. Not that people who sub to this channel would be surprised. Johnny Depp didn't help the image any, but I'm referring to the Gene Wilder version mainly. Okay, so let's start with the fact that it was originally written as a children's book by Roald Dahl, a British novelist. Roald Dahl, his name, a pseudonym most likely, even sounds like a pedophile code phrase. Roald Dahl. If you're familiar with British slang, a wanker should put Wonka in perspective. A Willy has always meant a male member, emphasized by the reaction of the guys in grade school when Free Willy came out, or whenever it was. So it's Willy Wanker. Not off to a good start here. While Wonka may only wear a purple coat and top hat, it should be noted that a top hat is a Masonic symbol that I won't go on about here. In this image, he's surrounded by his dwarf fetish, who represent children he'd otherwise have working for him if he wasn't in such a hurry to kill them off in random accidents around his factory. Willy loves the little people. This is where it takes a really weird turn, though, as I read and paraphrase from a website I'll link to. Just be warned, I'm not reading some of the expletives from it if you read it yourself. One of the most beloved and oft-quoted moments in the ridiculously beloved and oft-quoted film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is the sequence in which the unbalanced candy maker displays his newest invention, lickable wallpaper. As the children and their guardians go to town on the wallpaper, Wonka declares, "Lick an orange, it tastes like an orange. The strawberries taste like strawberries. The snozberries taste like snozberries." We laugh because snozberries is obviously a fanciful fictional word, and nobody knows what they really were, except that Roald Dahl, the book's author, knew exactly what snozberries were. Their genitalia. A snozberry is a penis. It turns out the guy who thought a story about an insane recluse casually murdering a group of children had a pretty screwed up sense of humor, go figure. In 1979, Dahl decided to revisit snozberries in his adult novel, My Uncle Oswald. The equally witty and disgusting story revolves around Oswald Hendricks Cornelius, the titular uncle and greatest fornicator of all time. Along with his sexy accomplice, Yasmin Howcomely, he devises a complicated get-rich-quick scheme that involves Howcomely seducing Europe's most famous men and then selling used condoms full of their spent semen to women wishing to birth famous progeny. Please take some time to remind yourself that this book was written by one of the world's most beloved children's authors. The term snozberry comes up when Yasmin Howcomely recounts her experience with George Bernard Shaw. "How did you manage to roll the old rubbery thing on him?" "There's only one way when they get violent," Yasmin said. "I grabbed hold of his snozberry and hung on to it like grim death and gave it a twist or two to make him hold still." Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was written in 1964, 15 years before My Uncle Oswald revealed that the wallpaper was made to taste like a penis. In the strictest sense of the term, we're pretty sure this makes Willy Wonka a pedophile, and honestly, we're not that surprised. So, next time those who haven't turned off the TV yet think they can still sit down and watch innocent kid shows, think again at least about Willy. Scarred for life yet? Since I already mentioned Jim Carrey and The Mask last time, which had an animated series for a while, go figure, I thought I'd throw in this Grinch who's constantly stalking around children. He's a Krampus, also known as a Blackjack, a demon that eats kids. It always looks so innocent at face value, but to segue between peddlers of sweets and death, maybe you're familiar with Voodoo Donuts, based in Oregon with stores in Texas, Colorado, Hollywood, and many more coming soon. While they promote themselves with pink like a bikini coffee drive-thru, their slogans say a lot about them as well as the Willy Wonka-like character helping to sell them. A Masonic, shamanic voodoo Wonka. Shame, shame, shaman. Voodoo priests are generally known for wearing top hats, but it sure does look like Wonka to me. Again, sweets and death. One of their slogans is, good things come in pink boxes. Yes, but not the kind of thing you advertise unless you're a Babylonian whore. Then it also says the magic is in the hole underneath the willy there, and I don't think you need to go on about the satanic serpent imagery. That isn't enough to implicate pedophilia or association with this subject matter here, unless you take their signature donut, the voodoo doll, to imply a pedophile symbol with the spiral. Here's the list of symbols if you're not familiar. I should have shown this in the last video, but I assume everyone knows at this point. They put the pretzel in an odd place with this one, no coincidence, I'm sure. It otherwise seems pretty harmless, but there was a Miss Cleo donut with the color scheme that made it a little more suspicious. This was brought to my attention by a commenter with this video on her channel, so you can check that out in the description also. If there is a donut gate, it will take a lot more than these points to uncover it, but I'm not going to say I'd be surprised. And just to emphasize their character choices a little, aside from Mystic Cleo, they also like Prince a lot, and we know who he sold his soul to. And I also know we can get carried away with the color scheme here, I get that. Sometimes a violet is just a violet, but when I saw this David Bowie donut, it seemed like a pattern was starting to develop. I'm still hunting up their Hail Satan donut, but notice the ubiquitous pedo spiral on his head. Coincidence? I mean, it's not like they put inverted pentagrams on their donuts or something. Oh. The place blares McPhallic duh and assorted death metal in the store, attracts musicians like Danzig making devil horns, and pushes their employees into being forceful with customers just to make as much money as possible. Can't say it's a pedo underground, but it's most definitely a satanic atmosphere. A website made by an ex-employee went on about how they run stacks of money through counters in the back room, like a scene from Scarface, so I'll leave a link for that too. I do have to wonder if the pedo symbol has something to do with the demonic spiral portals often referenced in many ancient cultures that I've shown many times. It is why Satanists, whatever you want to call them, involve children in black sex rituals. Their energy empowers the human matrix battery to summon entities and open dimensions. It's a little understood aspect of occult science, just my own opinion. Another commenter, thanks Tim, brought up Barney the dinosaur, who I forgot had a green chest, let alone gold toes. I think it goes without saying Barney has always been suspect, though. There's also this well-known toothbrushing fail video that might lend weight to the argument. I'm sure the phony Jews who run the media, and I'm not going to bother with the proof I could easily produce and have before, have everything to do with this based on their Kabbalist Talmudic values alone. The Talmud encourages pedophilia. Not all purple dinosaurs are necessarily related to pedophilia, like Dino from the Flintstones. But then again, the Flintstones were created by Hanna-Barbera, or at least produced. And who was the original Hannah? Most likely the one from Samuel in the Bible. Coincidence? Maybe not. I'm not here to harp about the phony Jews, though. I'm just saying be careful what your kids watch if you actually let them. We probably don't know the half of what's subliminally buried in these shows. Most people already suspect the purple Teletubby and are probably familiar with this clip here. I think it goes without saying that purple is mostly recognized as the primary color of the gay trans agenda, even if it started out as a symbol of royalty. But it's also the highest color chakra of enlightenment, and like pink, can also be considered a color of love. It's how all these agendas have been pushed on us in the name of love and acceptance. We see the synthesis of Masonic red and blue creating NWO purple. If there was an official NWO flag, no doubt it would be purple. I could go on about Chuck E. Cheese even more than I did in my last video. Again, note the color scheme, and it's subtly emphasized by The Simpsons with this witticism here. Yeah, it's all about the pizza. I didn't make a big point about Chuck E. Pizza and how that may relate to Pizzagate, but that Simpsons quip is actually based on true events. Pedophiles may know where to find the kids all in one place, but Chuck's colors only emphasize my point. One of my initial videos had a bit about Seth MacFarlane, Family Guy, the CIA, American Dad, and the Galian, even how there were crossover shows of The Simpsons and Family Guy. People still think The Simpsons are harmless. Okay, here you go.
Oh my god, that's amazing! That's the coolest thing ever! Hey, I want to try.
Okay. Mo's tavern.
Hello, Mo. Your sister's being raped. Is that one?
Sure. Harmless the way they've made rape into comedy in a lot of shows in recent years. It was shown in the Kinsey Syndrome that the point of Playboy and similar magazines was to push a pedophile agenda all along, even the trans agenda, mainly through inferences in the cartoons and advertising in them, and not just an anything goes attitude that makes bigotry like that Simpsons segment acceptable to the masses. Pedophilia was the point all along. But just to show that not everything is necessarily a reference, even if purple and green are used together. There's Daphne here from Scooby-Doo, the Lego version, though she is dressed quite a bit like the Gamergate girl where pedophilia did come into question briefly. People who envision a real future, as opposed to those of us seeing the end times, are trying hard not to let Pizzagate drop. But if there were a future, it would eventually be lost to public memory, just like the rest when nothing's done about it. Another I'd forgotten had a direct pizza reference was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're green and often depicted with gold shells. There are others who made videos about this reference specifically, so I'll try to link at least one. Then there's Swampy. I don't think it's a big stretch to include a Disney character that's green with a purple frill, scales, or whatever, while many of his friends have gold teeth. I've covered the Disney sex subliminals enough to where I figure everyone is aware. And we might even find some symbolism in the show, but I'll just connect another of their characters instead, the more famous Buzz Lightyear from Disney Pixar's Toy Story. Oh yeah, Buzz has already been called into trans agenda question, both him and his good friend Woody, and he is clearly sporting the color scheme, or close enough. I know purple and green is supposed to evoke a feeling of something strange and alien, not just a pedophile scheme, but I want you to note this here. Well, go figure. Yeah, the memes this thing got, I'm sure you can guess. Who in their right mind comes up with this stuff then, if that's not what Buzz represents? Come on. Like Giorgio from Ancient Aliens here, I'm not saying Buzz is gay or a pedophile, but Buzz is a gay pedophile whose name alone I can make a number of lewd comments about. Buzz. Not saying it was aliens, but it's aliens. One I did watch when I was a kid, and I'd never have connected it if I didn't see it first, was The Great Grape Ape. Okay, he's purple and he wears green. Big deal. If it weren't for the gold van they drove around in or on, I might not call it into question. It's possible even back then they were pushing this agenda right under parents' noses. Certainly the kids would never know. Revisiting Voodoo Donuts for a minute, they actually have a grape gorilla ale they're marketing in a partnership because of their signature grape donut, the Grape Ape. I'm not saying there's a correlation between the grape apes or pedophilia, but they are creating a buzz. I've no doubt there's an inside joke as to why only half the donut gets the fuzzy sprinkles. The more we investigate their voodoo chain, the more suspect it will look, I'll bet. Again, I know these colors are often used with aliens, superheroes, and the like, but I think most understand by now what those two in particular actually represent. Aliens are really demonic entities, so-called greys anyway, and superheroes are a push for self-divinity by the powers that be, especially the Masons, who want to attain godhood for themselves, while dragging the mindset of the youth along with them. Purple and green are often used with villains and anti-heroes, especially little green men like Invader Zim. Purple is even the new black for villains, and I just want to point out the pizza in the image there with him. Coincidence? This is one of Superman's nemeses, Brainiac, as if Superman, isn't a Masonic symbol enough. Like Spider-Man wearing blue and red, the makings of pedo-purple when mixed, and let's not start on Heidi Spidey, is part of that Masonic image of self-divinity in my opinion. I just have to throw in the Bizarro Superman too, since they sometimes like to purple him up. I think most will agree the Earth is quickly becoming the Bizarro world here. There's this villain from the Green Lantern, which I know next to nothing about, and I'm going to say him and the Hulk have no bearing on this topic if anyone ends up wondering. Hulk smash, not molest, insofar as I know anyway. Notice there's always a Lego character for just about any genre these days though, just like Daphne before. Lego does its part to help push these mindsets on children, molding the minds of tomorrow. The Joker was also commented on after my last video, and he's a pretty obvious pedo. You know, his minions are Oompa Loompas. And would it still be an Illuminati expose video if there wasn't at least one eyeball shot? At this point, I'm thinking if Batman's arch rivals were really true to life, then they'd all be pedos as well as Satanists and insane. So again, this is about awareness and keeping your kids away from things like this, let alone our adult selves. May not seem like a big issue, we can handle it. But as a father in particular, God makes us responsible for what sins we let our kids help themselves to, as does Yeshua. But without the love of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, it's all pretty meaningless as we push on into the last days. Believe it or don't. The new movie by Disney Pixar, Coco, is a blatant celebration of death for kids. If you're new to Disney symbolism, just happened on this at random and have kids, I urge you to look into the blatant witchcraft, sex subliminals, and general warping of worldviews buried in just about all of what Disney produces. It's why I make these videos, to expose a larger satanic agenda. I could have went on about the new Beauty and the Beast, the implications of genetic hybridization, legalized bestiality, and Stockholm Syndrome. Disney keeps beating these drums for a reason, and it's not just to make money. Coco may seem harmless fun to most, but it's going to be no better, I'm sure. Let's start with the synopsis first. Despite his family's baffling generations-old ban on music, Miguel dreams of becoming an accomplished musician like his idol, Ernesto de la Cruz. Desperate to prove his talent, Miguel finds himself in the stunning and colorful land of the dead, hell, following a mysterious chain of events. Along the way, he meets charming trickster Hector, the dog I'm guessing, and together they set off on an extraordinary journey to unlock the real story behind Miguel's family history. First of all, the Day of the Dead festival this obviously revolves around centers on ancestor worship, just as this movie's plot revolves around it. It's a form of false idol worship, a word Disney themselves used, idol. People build actual altars to honor dead ancestors. Disney is well aware of this, to be certain, and prefer it that way, anything biblically forbidden. I think it's safe to say anything revolving around Halloween, also known as Samhain, is satanic in origin no matter what country or druids had their hand in it. And there are plenty of Halloween expose videos to back up that statement. More to the point though, 85% or more of Mexico is Catholic, and had all these rituals and beliefs foisted on them by the Babylonian Church of Gunpoint Conversion to begin with, and helped make the festival what it is today. If there's one thing the church knows about, it's death. I already addressed the accusations of black veil brides, nuns, and bones of illegitimate babies buried underneath cathedrals. There's a big exo mark of the beast skull and bones overshadowing just about every cathedral in some scandalous way, and I'll leave it at that. The land of the dead Miguel travels to is hell by another name, the opposite of the bosom of Abraham, heaven, in Luke 16:19-31 of the Bible. And if it is even vaguely Catholic, then the Bible does figure into it, regardless of Disney's own witchcraft and Satanism. This is how Disney warps minds and helps trivialize death, beasts, and hell. They've done it before. They're just playing off of the false Christianity the Catholic Church provided Latin countries while taking MK Ultra, a subject I don't have time for here, to a broader world stage. The movie's imagery so far looks to revolve mainly around the death theme. There's a skull on Miguel's guitar, for example, and elsewhere. But there's only a trailer to watch so far, and hard to tell if there will be much Illuminati or subliminal sex symbolism in particular. I probably won't bother to find out by not watching it. I just see what they're doing with this and why it's important to entertain, that is, detain the brain of children with this theme. Also, maybe more importantly, the Coco is actually a mythical creature well known in Latin countries. Reading from a website about it here and skipping around a bit. He can be considered a Hispanic version of a bugbear, as it is a commonly used figure of speech representing an irrational or exaggerated fear. The Coco is a male being, while Coca is the female version. The myth of the Coco originated in Portugal and Galicia. According to the Real Academia Española, the word Coco derives from the Portuguese coco, which referred to a ghost with a pumpkin head. The word Coco is used in colloquial speech to refer to the human head in Portuguese and Spanish. Coco also means skull. During the Portuguese and Spanish colonization of Latin America, the legend of the Cuco was spread to countries such as Mexico, Argentina, and Chile. The ancient Portuguese metaphor to give someone coca means to have one subdued and at the disposal with caresses and cuddles, to make one dizzy, meek with magic potions and magic spells. Magic. The words acocado, spoiled rotten child, and acocorar, to spoil a child rotten, derive from coca. Many Latin American countries refer to the monster as El Cuco. In northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, where there is a large Hispanic population, it is referred to by its anglicized name, the Coco Man. In Brazilian folklore, the monster is referred to as Cuca and pictured as a female humanoid alligator, derived from the Portuguese coca, a dragon. Satan. Breaking off for a second, this is a lot the same as the Egyptian deity Sobek, having a crocodile head associated with the Nile. There's also a guardian of the underworld or abyss that's depicted much the same, Amit, the eater of the dead. Anyway, it is not the way the Coco looks, but what he does that scares most. It is a child eater and kidnapper. It may immediately devour the child, leaving no trace, or it may spirit the child away to a place of no return, but it only does this to disobedient children. This is how they scare kids into behaving in those countries, not unlike Krampus are used during Christmas time. The Coca is on the lookout for child's misbehavior on the top of the roof. The Coco takes the shape of any dark shadow and stays watching. It represents the opposite of a guardian angel and is frequently compared to the devil. Others see the Coco as a representation of the deceased of the local community. A Coco can also be a giant, apparently, which I thought was interesting since I've made a point about the Rephaim and Gibborim of the Bible before. Os Cocos, giant representations of the Coco and Coca of Ribadeo. The tradition dates back to the 19th century. In Ribadeo, two giant figures represent El Coco y la Coca, that dance at the sound of drummers and Galician bagpipe players. And after all that, I started wondering if there wasn't a correlation with the coca plant and even Coca-Cola. A drink that will bring you demons. How refreshing, like battery acid. The cocoa is actually how cocoa nuts got their name. Interestingly, Wikipedia makes this claim about Grover from Sesame Street. In Spain, he is called Coco, which is Spanish for coconut, referring to the shape of his head and mouth. Yeah. BS. You'd think Cookie Monster would be the Cocoa Monster, but no more than Sonny the Cuckoo Bird, who's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Not officially, anyway. So Disney made a movie about the boogeyman without making it look that way. They would know full well what it really means, and maybe they'll even introduce the Coco in the underworld and say it's a ghost or a demon from the kid's family's past. With the death's head symbolism pretty obvious just in the trailer, I'm sure we can expect a lot of negativity to brainwash the minds of the youngsters unfortunate enough to actually watch this mind-warping garbage for their brains. If you want your kids to have nightmares, this is probably one to add to the list of tortures. One other interesting point I found was that Disney actually wanted to trademark the Day of the Dead, El Dia de los Muertos. I guess they wanted full rights over the dominion of Satan, but after enough backlash they dropped it. Seriously, trademarking a holiday and not even an American one? They just wanted it for merchandising mainly. Merchandising. Disney just wants to take MK Ultra to every nation it can, as if turning American girls like Miley into pizzas wasn't enough. Anyway, I'm sure Disney will make Coco into a fun, frolicky romp through hell for Miguel and his dog friend, while in reality we don't get to pick what demons we meet, let alone Satan in the land of the dead, especially to repair the mistakes of our families. It's what Yeshua spent 3 days in the belly of the earth for, much like Jonah and the whale, while awaiting resurrection, so we don't have to spend time in the land of the dead, hell. No ancestor worship required. The last thing Disney wants kids to do is confess their belief in Jesus and accept his gift of sacrifice on the cross. And this movie is just another nail in the coffin of that belief. Believe it or don't. Believe it or don't.